What's your worst story from the throw him in the pool, he'll learn how to swim parenting style? I actually used to be a swim teacher in college, teaching private lessons in people's backyards because of parents who had thrown their kids into the pool to sink or swim. It was usually moms calling me for help because they heard from a friend of a friend that I was able to teach their kid and get them to like the water again in about a month or less. One kid, he was 7, I had to sit with him on the pool deck the whole first lesson and bring buckets of water to him. His dad had dunked him multiple times and insisted that his son would just figure it out eventually because that's how he learned. Needless to say, he was never home when I was there. The mom had me come while dad was at work. 4 weeks later she had me come later in the afternoon so he would come home towards the end of the lesson. His dad saw his son swimming and cried happy tears. He had no idea I had been there 3 days a week for a month. My favorite student was a 70-year-old man who wanted to do a triathlon but never learned to swim because his dad threw him in as a child. It took about 3 months total, a lot of hand holding on the steps and shallow end, but he finally achieved his goal and I got to cheer him on at the finish line. I still remember how each of my students clung to my arms and clawed at my neck in their first lessons. I never dunked or forced anyone out of their comfort zone. My lessons had to be customized for each student to keep it fun and relaxing. The trauma in their eyes was haunting, though it stayed with me, and I never force anything on my kids that they aren't ready to do. It's about trust, not force. 7 years old. Had an asthma attack at our camp in the middle of the night. At that time, treatment for an attack was a nebulizer machine that required electricity, which we didn't have at our camp. My parents kept telling me that I just had to calm down and breathe better so the attack would go away on its own. They only intervened hours later because they couldn't sleep because of all the noise I was making as I choked and gasped for air. We drove 3 hours back to our house, passing multiple hospitals along the way because they were embarrassed that I was in such bad shape and blamed me for just not breathing properly. Fun times, eater. I've been trying to reply to everyone's questions, but there's a lot of them, so I'll just answer the most common ones here. I still have asthma, but it has been well managed for years now. I take Zenhale every day and Ventolin as needed. I've been no contact with my mother for over a decade. She's a narcissist who not only emotionally abused me, but encouraged my older brother to do so as well. This led to him physically and sexually abusing me, and when I eventually confronted her on this, she said it was my fault for being such a bitch. I cut her out of my life, and that's made a world of difference for my mental health. Obviously no contact with brother either. I'm still in contact with my father. They divorced in my early 20s. We aren't close, but I still find enough value in the relationship to keep talking to him. He isn't actively cruel like my mother was, just lost in his own world, I guess you could say. I feel sorry for him that he hasn't managed to overcome his own demons the way that I have. Overall, I'm happy and healthy now. I have a lovely husband, and we've created a good life for ourselves. I do have CPTSD from the years of abuse I lived through, but therapy and proper medication have helped tremendously. Thank you to everyone for your kind words. They mean a lot. That basically describes exactly how my parents would teach me anything. It wasn't really teaching at all. It was showing me once super quickly, then expecting me to fully grasp the concept, because I was supposed to absorb that knowledge from observation alone apparently. And when I wouldn't get it on the first time, I would be berated or beat. When I was 6, my parents tried to teach me how to tie my shoes. They showed me super quick once, fast enough that I couldn't process what was happening, then told me to do it. I didn't understand, and so they started yelling at me, telling me how I shouldn't even wear shoes, because I was so stupid. I didn't learn how to properly tie my shoes until I was 18, and I had to teach myself. I still use the bunny ears method. The worst part of that was that people would make fun of me for not knowing how, and I couldn't explain the situation at home because they all just thought that I was making excuses. Where I live, we have bags of milk. We have a pitcher where we place the bags, and I usually tie an elastic band around the corner that I snip open. One summer, when I was 5 or 6, I woke up bright and early because my brother was in summer school, so I'd have the whole morning to myself. I went to make a bowl of cereal, and when it was time to put the milk back, my mom tried to teach me how to tie the elastic band to the bag. I did it, but she had told me it was wrong, and so beat me and told me to do it again. For the entire morning she would tell me that I was doing it wrong and beat me. By the time I had my cereal, it was noon, and my brother had already come home. I don't even think I was doing it wrong, because I've been doing it the same way since then. I'm pretty sure my mom wanted an excuse to beat me. This kind of counts. I was a kid who always zoned out or stared into space, which resulted in a lot of adults, including teachers and my parents, thinking I was deliberately ignoring them. They tried everything. It's like I wouldn't even hear them when they yelled. Then I acted like I didn't even know what they were yelling at me for. What a little asshole, right? I was such a little idiot. I'd stop mid-sentence, zone out for sometimes even up to or past a minute, and then pick up my sentence right where I left off. Sometimes I would stop walking for no reason. It could take me upwards of hours to finish a page of maths homework. I was so slow that what took classmates 5 minutes to do could take me all of a lesson. My mum would tell me things only for me to later insist she has never said that. She would call for me, and I wouldn't answer until she had to yell, at which point I would turn around and insist she didn't have to shout. In the end, it was always the same. A teacher would decide that if I didn't want to give them respect, I could just do things alone. I should have listened to them while they were explaining things if I was really interested in learning, right? So they stopped helping me when I didn't understand something they had already said. Because I should have been listening in the first place. Surely, this would get the message across, right? After all, this bratty little kid has to learn to listen. Well, as a result of stress, I had a grand mal seizure. I was taken to hospital, where I was diagnosed with absence epilepsy, a form of epilepsy that doesn't have the tremors associated with typical seizures. A person having an absence seizure simply stares, having a completely still seizure with their eyes open. As a result of this, it often looks like someone is simply staring out into space, unresponsive, or ignoring you, when they may actually be having a medical emergency. So, during times when I would be ignoring a teacher, I was actually having an absence seizure. Suddenly, they would be yelling at me, and I honestly didn't know why. Now I have to pay for seizure medication and therapy. Edit. I'm realizing that this is a lot of people's first time hearing about absence epilepsy. My experience of it is a little atypical. I would have seizures anywhere from a few seconds to a couple minutes long. I would have hundreds a day, and they persist into adulthood. Here is a page with more information on it, including bite-sized information on what to look out for. By knowing the signs of absence epilepsy, you might save someone years of pain and perhaps even worsening symptoms. It would mean so much to me if you could glance over it. You might realize it fits your little cousin, niece, nephew, etc. You could be the hero that I never got to have. Edit 2. Electric Boogaloo. Thank you so much for the gold. If you have a story about absence epilepsy, please share. The more folks know about it, the better. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. It means the world to me that people are learning about this. Genuinely, it's beyond words how precious it is to me that people are learning. Fewer kids will have to go through what I did this way. I got pregnant at 13. Mom allowed her new hubby to take me for the abortion, then he beat my ass when I got home from the procedure. She never asked who, what, how. I'd been molested since I was 4/5, and somewhere in my stupid brain I guess I thought that such was love. When I got pregnant again at 14, I was made to keep the baby to teach me a lesson. Again, no one asked. No one tried to educate me. Finally, at 25, my mom pissed me off with her cluelessness, and in a fit of rage, I blurted examples of all the years of sexual abuse I endured, and she said, "All these years, I thought Robert had been messing with you, and that was the reason you were acting out." You guys, when I tell you that my head exploded at the same time all of the air left my body, I was stunned. She thought her now ex-husband had been molesting me, impregnated me not once, but twice, yet you never asked me. For clarity, it was never my stepdad. Your desire to be married to a serial cheater was far more important than my total health. She divorced him when I was 23 because she finally caught him with his best friend's wife. That was simply too much for her to handle. This explains why she shipped my daughter and I off to my grandparents 3 months after her birth. My mom has always had an unnaturally close relationship with my oldest daughter. This conversation revealed why, for 12 years, my mom thought my daughter was fathered by her husband. Anyway, I finally learned about sex education / birth control from my 11th grade pet teacher. She saw my miserable self and did her best to mother and educate me at every opportunity. This didn't happen to me, but to my older brother, so I had a front row seat to all of it. He was looking to purchase a house for cheap that was in a semi-rural area and wanted at least some acreage near it. His budget was way smaller than it should have been for the houses he wanted and was looking at the most dilapidated, terrible houses ever. He found one that was just what he wanted: multiple rooms, a basement, 2 acres of woods, and about 15 to 30 minutes away from nearby cities. It was only about $120,000, and he was sold on it. The problems were abundant, however, and I told him not to do it. Our parents loved this idea. They pushed and encouraged him, looked at it and took pictures, helped fill out loan paperwork, and even started planning all of the restoration projects JT would need. My brother was committed all the way to the point of confirming the loan and moving there immediately. I was mortified. This house was an absolute dump, made in the early 1910s and redid once in 1950. It had mold, holes in the roof and walls, old rusted wiring, peeling wallpaper and crumbling shelves. The only redeemable part was the size of the rooms, which were pretty decent. I begged him to not do it and it finally made him think twice. Finally, he relented and listened to me. He stopped and decided to not do anything. Later, I brought up how bad of an idea that house was, and my parents completely agreed. They thought it was garbage, but they wanted him to follow through, because it would have been a good learning experience. I was floored and asked why they would support this then, and they simply responded that it would teach him to be careful with these kinds of things. They were literally going to let him go into massive debt and struggle so hard in order to teach him to be more careful of opportunities, and they tried to push it and encourage it instead of just sitting down and explaining all of this. TLDR, parents were going to let my brother go into massive debt to buy a shitty old house in order to teach him a lesson on waiting to find a better house deal after encouraging and nearly forcing him to go through with it. The first thing I can think of is when I was 7 and my mom signed me up for weekly swimming classes. I was terrified of water and I did not want to go to them, but I didn't have a choice. When I got to the first lesson, she told 2 of the instructors, 2 big burly men, that she wanted them to carry me into the pool and just keep me there. She warned them that I would freak out, kick, punch, scream and try to escape. But if they just held my arms and legs, I would eventually stop. And that is what they did. I learned to be in the water, but I did not manage to learn how to swim on this course. I absolutely hated it. The best time of the week was right after the lesson were over, and we were on our way home in the car, because at this point the next lesson was as far away as possible. I still have a strong dislike for pools and swimming. And I'm still afraid of water, where I can't reach the bottom with my heels and have my head above the surface at the same time. These and other things contributed to a low self-esteem and confidence issues. As I got older, I started thinking that to not be seen as a wuss, I had to dive headfirst into things completely fearless, like idiotic off-road biking stunts and skateboarding as fast as gravity would allow it on a public road with traffic. It sometimes gave me problems. When I was 14, I was visiting a friend that had bought snow skis for his kick bikes. We started racing them down a long steep field, and we got the idiotic idea that we should build a jump at the bottom. And I of course did not want to be seen as the weakling who chickened out of everything and jumped at the chance to try it first. I blasted down the hill as fast as I could. I went much faster than any of us had ever gone before, hit the jump, and had a massive fall. The skis weren't designed for jumping and would poke down into the snow when you landed, no matter what you did. I landed on my wrist and at the very least sprained it. But I think I may actually have gotten the tiny fracture. My friends did not try the jump. A while later my dad came to pick me up and drive me to an extracurricular activity. I told him that I couldn't go because of the accident. He felt sorry for me, understood completely and took me home instead. Then my mom got annoyed because I didn't go to my practice session. I tried to tell her what had happened and that my wrist was in terrible pain, but she thought I was overreacting. Luckily it was not my dominant hand that was affected, so I managed to get on mostly like normal. But I got criticized for not putting in enough effort at the extracurricular activity for a while. The wrist gave me trouble for more than 6 months, and it went on to give me problems several times over the years. I went through the exact same thing with a damaged tailbone a while later, and an undiagnosed back pain when I was 16. I got some remarks because I acted like an old man, and this couldn't possibly be that bad. I tried to tell her that something as simple as breathing made it hurt, and yawning felt awful, but it did not get through. After this I gradually stopped telling about pains, ailments and most other things that happened in my life. TW, suicide, self-harm, trauma and stuff. This I stabbed my parents, but stabbed my teacher. I was 17 when this happened. Some backstory. I have severe ice trauma and PTSD from it, 2 failed attempts, depression, an eating disorder, etc. mental problems. I never talked to my parents about it, and I didn't want to at that point. However, I was talking to that teacher regularly cause he helped me a lot. Someday I tell him I self-harmed the night before, and he goes, you can either go to her yourself, or I'll call her parents. While I was still at school I got a call from my mom asking what happened, even though my parents knew I self-harmed. Then my dad and stepmom call me, asking me the same questions. I explain it again, but I'm just so tired of it. I was RLY not doing well. I didn't go home that day until it was pretty late, so I wouldn't have to talk to my mom. The next day at school, my teacher pulls me aside and tells me we have to act or this would get out of hand. I was very depressed, but nowhere near suicidal anymore, and I told him I wanted to wait a few more months till I turn 18, so I wouldn't have to talk to my parents a bit. In his opinion though, that couldn't be such a big deal. He said, well, I just threw you in the water, I'll learn how to swim. I stayed away from home and ignored him for the rest of the week. He tells my other teachers, who again tell my parents, who would only do as much as yell at me or guilt trip me cause they couldn't understand it. They said I'd have to get admitted or I couldn't go to school anymore. I was at a psych ward for 3 months after that and never RLY went back to school because of corona, but it definitely wasn't good for my mental health and I didn't learn how to swim. I turned 18 at the ward, got released, moved out and broke off contact with my parents. I'm 19 now, and that move my teacher or teachers made nearly drove me to attempt a 3rd time. I'm doing a little better now, and I'm on a different school, but everything that's happened was so unfair and decided on behind my back, even though I was 17 and cooperative. It would only been 4 months. I usually wouldn't post this on subs like this, so I hope I don't get hate for posting my story. Slight twist on your question, but I feel it applies at least somewhat. Some friends of mine kept leaving their daughter with me while they worked out their issues. They should've never been together in the first place, much less been parents to an incredible little girl. Anyway, she would make regular visits to Uncle Joey's house for a couple hours while they hashed out whatever they needed to, which usually resulted in one party leaving to get high somewhere while the other came to pick up their daughter. Well, one summer baby girl cake face, that's what I started calling her, wanted to use the pool. I knew she didn't know how to swim, so I took it upon myself to get her little wrist floaties, swim trunks and a suit with a built-in life jacket to teach her to swim and tread water. Literally within the month I taught her to cannonball in, open her arms and kick her legs to get to the top, and once she breaches the water to paddle to the nearest edge, climb out and do it all again. Proud uncle moment. Well, anyway, I hadn't told them she was learning to swim, only that we went to the pool so she could splash around and be distracted for a couple of hours. Apparently parents and baby girl Cakeface went to a pool party and gave everyone a heart attack when she said, "Mommy, daddy, look," and ran straight to the pool and cannonballed in. They told me people jumped in after her, and she was so confused. They asked her who taught her to swim, and she snitched me out. Lol. Turned into a conversation about how I had to keep her distracted from the awful environment they were putting her in. They got divorced less than a year after. The second I turned 18, my bipolar stepmom made me move out. No diploma, no car, no driver's license. I had a full-time and part-time job. That's it. My rent was $650 and I was making about $800 a month. This toss into the pool was so my dad and her, a couple making $100k plus a year, could live in an RV at her parents' place. My dad didn't like the idea, but I think it was due to his own life being chaotic for so long that it tired him out completely. He went along with it. I grew up poor in a single parent household, so the standard of living wasn't all bad for me, but I burned out fast. I lived about 4 months like that before a mixture of exhaustion, depression, and loneliness made me try to kill myself with alcohol. I'm not a big drinker, but that night I took down a bottle of Rumplements and 3/4 of a bottle of Jägermeister. I was so blasted by the time I polished off the Jagger that I thought the bottle of Rumplements would do it. Nope. Woke up the next morning feeling like death with my friends looking at me sleeping on the floor. They talked to me about what happened and left a while after. My stepmom came in and shooed Myers about an hour after they left. She said I gave up, that I couldn't hack it, that I didn't try hard enough. My older stepsister had been flourishing with her driver's license and her car my parents cossign for, but refused to cossign one for me and her roommates that help her split the bills. Of course I faking failed. I do my best to leave the past in the past, but there was a lot of shit that could gone a whole lot different for me if they had helped me. I walked to and from work, soaked in dishwater in the dead of Midwestern winter, because my parents refused to help me. The second my money stealing, shoplifting, disobedient, manipulative and spoiled sister turned 16, they bought her a $3,800 car. I was driving a $500 car I paid for myself with an exhaust and fuel leak at that time. I needed help with money for repairs since they refused to put me on their insurance, and I was paying $220 a month for liability. I haven't to this day never gotten a ticket. I was largely forgotten about when my dad married her, and it couldn't have come at a worse time. Those were the years that I really needed a boost to get my life on track. I got my license when I was 20, first car when I was 21, and I'm 26 now with a wonderful girlfriend, awesome pets, a nice apartment and an okay job. They say that pain builds character. It doesn't. It just hurts. I was in my mid-20s and moved back in with my dad, trying to get away from drugs and alcohol that were prevalent in the nightclub I worked at. Living at home for a while was nice, but I guess I was getting on my dad's nerves and our disagreements escalated. I came home from work one day with my sheet thrown on the front lawn and him demanding his key back, so I left. I spent 5 days on a friend's couch while I looked for a place to live, and ended up in a house owned by people I met in the after his club I hung out at. Great crowd, right? Lived in that house for maybe 6 to 8 months before I was able to find a more stable place to live that didn't involve waking up at 3 AM to music being blasted from 200-watt powered amps. I remained close friends with one of the many transient roommates who floated through that house. One day we got close and slept together. The next time I spent time with this person, they had completely changed and were super clingy. I felt uncomfortable with how they were behaving, and I wanted to go home, but they, being my ride home, insisted that I stay. After being convinced with MDMA, read, earlier drug problem, we ended up getting high, and that's the night my child was conceived. 18 months later I was in court and ordered to pay child support, and I've been paying for what feels like being wrapped ever since. Now my dad only calls me when he wants to come visit my kid, who I don't have custody of, and who only visits when she feels like. The best way to describe what it feels like to be in this position is somber. It's like a heavy blanket of what feels like unfairness always weighing me down and preventing me from doing the things I'd like to do with my life. like start a business or try to move to another city. I never wanted to bring a kid into this world without having two parents that worked as a team, and now I've ended up a single parent without guardianship rights to my kid. When I was in the 6th grade, a boy in the 8th grade, but held back twice, intentionally slammed my hand in the bus window. My town was super small, 600 people, and I lived in the center of a dead-end dirt road. The boy that did it lived at the end of the road. My middle school was 4 towns over, and when I got to school my thumb was black and blue and super swollen. I went to the nurse's office, and I'm not sure why. I think she had beef with my mother, because my mom liked to punch people back then, but she dismissed my complaints and told me to get to class. I went all day in level 10 pain. Since our school was 4 towns over, the bus ride home was 45 minutes, and by the time I got there my mom had already left for work, a nurse, in the same town I went to school in. This is around 1991, so no cell phones, and it was a long distance call from school on a payphone. I had pretty much zero contact with her some days. My mother called to check in with us that night. It was 8 p.m. and we were getting ready for bed, and my sister told her that my hand looked horrible. Mom rushes the 45 minutes home from work, picks me up, drives me to the nearest hospital, which was 45 minutes away, and after a few hours in the air and several rays we learned that not only was the growth disc slipped, but my thumb was shattered just below the 3rd knuckle. My mother was pissed. When we pulled onto our road she was still fuming, and drove right past our house and down to the neighbor's house. She beeped the horn when we arrived, and the boy's mother walked out. My 5 feet 2 inches tall 105-pound mother punched her right in the nose, hauled back, and it was like the crack heard around the world. My mom was stressed that weekend rarely ever went out, but decided to go to unwind. She went to the local watering hole with a few friends and she happened to run into the school nurse. 3 bouncers had to pull my mom off her. The nurse transferred to another school in the district the next year. I'm pretty sure my mom had something to do with it. So my aunt has always been a very visual parent. She always went to the kids' stuff at school, posted them on Facebook, but when it came to actually parenting, she wouldn't lift a finger. My uncle is a literal gaming addict and just never did cheat. With the setup out of the way, I had been sent to live with them for a couple years. My dad was even more neglectful than they were. I ended up basically raising their kids, including taking them to the pool every single day. The kids were around 7 and 10 when this happened, and neither of them could swim. I started with teaching the 10-year-old first, and she got the hang of it pretty quick. The 7-year-old has some kind of learning disability that everyone in the family knows he has, but auntie refuses to get him diagnosed. Anti-vax, anti-mental health. Shocker. I start teaching him, and even over a year later he's still a very poor swimmer, and I don't let him in the deep end without floaters. That summer we ended up going to a water park with a large slide that ended in a 7-foot deep bowl. I tell auntie to not let him go on it because he can't swim well enough to drop that low, and she responds with an angry "my son can swim." Despite the fact that she hadn't actually taken them swimming in any of the 2 years I had lived there. He got on the ride despite me pleading and being told to shut up. When he got to the bottom he said the pool was dark and he couldn't swim back to the top. He nearly drowned, having to be saved by a lifeguard. The ride got shut down for 2 hours because of this, just because she couldn't, except her kid wasn't perfect. My dad took it upon himself to teach my baby sister and I how to ride bikes, which with his anger management problems and total inability to bond with either of us was a recipe for disaster. He took us to a park and said we weren't leaving until we could bike home. At one point he had to duct tape my hands to the handlebars. Things did not go well. We were actually sort of getting the hang of it several hot hours later. No water, no brakes, just lots of angry whispers and rough bruises from being squeezed or lightly shaken until we stopped sniffling. Crying was for babies. We were biking around the pond, me trailing my sister, until she slammed on her brakes because a snake slithered across the path. She wailed and I swerved to avoid hitting her. I hit a crack in the pavement, and with my hand still duct taped to the handlebars, I couldn't figure out how to stop. I hit the grass, lost control, and crashed into the pond, whereupon I started screaming. There was a police station on the other side of the woods. just a thin copse of trees from this park. Dad came running over, yelling at us both. My sister had dropped her bike and was hugging herself, sobbing because she felt like she was to blame for me sitting in the marsh. Dad sloughed into the mud, ripped my hands off the handlebars, ripped off the tape, slapped me to make me stop sniffling, and told us to take ours to the car. He was so done with us. Then he stormed off, kicking every loose rock and stopping to shake a tree before disappearing behind the bathroom. My left pinky was in agony and still gets painfully numb when it gets cold. My sister was of course no help, so I just got sick of her sobbing, grabbed both bikes and followed. There were 2 cop cars in the parking lot, and my dad was scary calm, trying to explain away the howling they'd heard. Of course we didn't say anything. We were terrified of getting beaten the minute we got home. Which we got anyway, but you know, neither of us ever learned how to ride a bike, and he still gets disgusted when he remembers. He thinks we are fat lazy idiots because he traumatized us. Not parenting but boot camp. It was swim week. If you were a competent swimmer it was skate city. But if you had trouble at all it was a week-long nightmare. 1 or 2 were pushed off the jump tower when they wouldn't jump, then had to redo it for improper form. People who had trouble treading water would wrap themselves around other swimmers. One kid was having so much trouble with the tread water that he tried to grab the edge of the pool, but the drill instructor just kept pushing him back with a broom handle. One recruit actually made it up over the edge of the pool, stood up, and immediately was Spartan kicked back in. If you passed the first day you would come back the other days for higher swim qualifications, while those who did poorly came back to do the same basic qualification again. The good swimmers relentlessly mocked the bad swimmers, even telling them they should kill themselves. Keep in mind the drill instructor were looking for every little reason to disqualify someone for any event, so it was almost a matter of luck as to who was disqualified. That's the setting. While I was done sitting on the bleachers I hear a shout. The alarm is pulled, and a red light glows. I barely catch a glimpse of the recruit lying motionless on the deck. The drill instructor starts shouting for us to leave and make a formation outside, per the policy we'd been briefed on at the beginning of the day. There were all sorts of rumors that day saying the guy died, but I was able to sneak some news from a buddy in the medical platoon during chow that he had survived, but had broken ribs. Recruits are allotted 1 hour at the end of every day, where they're allowed to talk to each other. Edit. I just read the comments and realized this post was not actually just about pools. Lol. Used my college fund to pay for the divorce. Made me shred the evidence. I actually put 2 and 2 together and figured that out. Got a confession from them for that like 2 weeks ago thanks to my therapist coincidentally. Come time for college it was, don't worry about the money, just do it education. Lol. Couldn't apply for any special grants / loans / scholarships whatever because parents were on high income brackets, so according to the system I was an ultra rich kid despite not having more than $1,000 in the bank all at once ever as an adult before I turned 27. Yes, I celebrated the sheet out if it because it also marked me having finished aggressively paying off my college scam loans. Come time for housing it was, well, we are already putting the others through college and you're the oldest, so you should be able to afford. Back in my day college at Wendy's was $6 billion and now blah blah blah. Come time for starving in the freezing winter night, need a place to stay, find a place, need $100, but lol can't transfer money overnight because the wire fee. Gonna do the 2 to 3 day transfer instead, you'll survive the cold, you're an Eagle Scout. Yeah, I'm still pretty salty about all that. Fortunately, mine happened to be closer to the cost at the time, so my brother was spared my fate. The step siblings were obviously unaffected, but they at least got the free housing. Man, just like faking anything at any time would been helpful. Thanks for the place to vent. Opus. 15 years old. I know it's much older than many of these stories here, but it's the first thing that came to mind. I was working at a summer camp in Wyoming, and I had stayed at the camp for almost the whole summer. The last day the camp was open was also the same day we had to take everything down, and I mean everything, putting all the rowboats and canoes away, taking all of the various tents down, deep cleaning the camp lodge, etc. We also had participants still in the camp we had to help out and inspect their campsites and such, and we were all heading home that afternoon/evening, so it was incredibly busy with having to pack up and clean everything point. So the day was already stressful enough, and what happened next really screwed me up to this day. I'm 23 now. My parents were staying at a separate campground about a mile up the road from the camp where I worked at. Mom told me they were gonna go hiking, and for the moment, they took a lot of the stuff I had already packed up. The deal was that I would finish doing all the cleaning around camp and then hike up to the campground and just chill in the trailer for a couple of hours while they were out hiking. Well, I hadn't had the chance to pack everything up, and my dad, who has a very short temper that is often unjustified, just absolutely lost it and beat the shit out of me in my tent. He also had a .45 strapped to his belt. He's military and carries a gun everywhere, and I seriously feared for my life. One of the camp rangers saw the incident and the police were called. My parents left before police arrived. There was a family that took me in for a little bit while all the court stuff was happening. My mom was trying to stop the violence from happening, so she wasn't in trouble with the law. However, when I finally went back home, Mom would blame me for the stuff that happened, and when I went to the doctor after the incident, they diagnosed me with anxiety, depression, OCD, and PTSD. Trying to cope with everything was hell in a handbasket. Mom definitely didn't help at all, and basically had the mentality of get over it, and you shouldn't have allowed it to happen. Dad didn't go to jail, but I seriously wish he did, because the rest of high school was a shitstorm. We got in fights all the time, sometimes turning physical. Our family lost a lot of sympathy from the church we went to. We became dysfunctional really quickly, and for a very long time. I didn't want to be home, and would take extra shifts at Wendy's, just so I didn't have to be home. It was miserable, but at least I got a considerable amount of money. My girlfriend at the time dumped me because she didn't want to deal with the fact that I didn't know how to cope with trauma. I moved out at 18. Things for me are much better now. I'm married and have a good job, and am in college. I do, however, have a lot of baggage left, and my wife gets exhausted with it. To this day, I'm still having to learn how to cope with the trauma, but my wife has been supporting me. Backstory: every kid is born with flat feet and eventually develops arches. I, on the other hand, developed collapsed arches as a child and therefore have extremely unstable ankles. Years ago, when I was a freshman in high school, I was late to a class and decided to run to get there before the bell rang. My left ankle rolled hard. My ankle basically touched the floor with my shin still upright. I limped into class, went down to the nurse's office, and walked out with crutches. That day I went home, showed my nurse mom my black and blue foot, and she said, "It's fine, just ice it." Anyone with family in the medical field know they're the worst patients and tend to minimize just about everything. My foot was black and blue for weeks. Fast forward about 10 years. I'm 25, and I have a dedicated podiatrist due to continued sprains. My podiatrist very excitedly tells me during my first appointment that I have the flattest feet he's ever seen, and there were physicians in Columbus that would love to see them, which is probably one of the weirdest things a doctor has ever told me, next to my eye doctor telling me I should hope for an early onset of cataracts for a lens replacement. Anyways, one day I sprained my left ankle, which I hadn't yet sprained, while seeing this doctor. Most of the time it's the right ankle. As usual, he takes a quick x-ray to check. And then he tells me that I have evidence of a past fracture on my left ankle from years prior that didn't heal correctly. Not anything critical, but just something he noticed. And I knew immediately that it was that one day back in high school when my mom told me, "Oh, it's fine, you're just a hypochondriac." I was walking around on a broken ankle for weeks because my mom, who is a nurse, was so certain it wasn't broken. As my grandma would say, the motto was, "You'll live if you don't die." I still give her shit for it to this day. I actually threw myself into the pool. I forgot that I couldn't swim without my floaties. Needless to say, I did learn pretty quickly, but not before seeing my mom laugh her ass off. My brother saved me, but that little push gave me the understanding needed to swim. Several years after that we were desperately moving states away, and since she was struggling with addiction and coming down, she drove 2 hours south of our destination. I had to get a road map and Lewis and Clark our as across 2 states. Made it work though, thank fuck for reliable signs and ancient roads. My dad on the other hand, had more chances to have me learn to swim, but I wasn't ever really good enough, so he just prepared for me to be bad, or subparagraph. Sudden realization of actual problems I may have, but there was an instance where we were visiting a friend of his that lived a little out of town. He didn't have gas or electricity, so he lit a fire every night. One particular night, the sun starts going down, and he said that I better light a fire. I was never sure if he was joking or not, and still I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, telling a child to build a fire or freeze to death is a pretty rough way. Go get tossed into a pool lol. After putting it all together I asked for a lighter, and he said you don't have one. As in, if I was asking for one, I couldn't have one, because apparently I didn't come prepared. By this time the sun was gone, and he really made it clear that, if I was by myself out there, that night would have sucked. His friend tossed a ball of paper soaked with a little bit of lighter fluid, and then a lit match into the fire pit, and my little wood teepee went up in flames. The warmth of that, and every other fire has always kindled the idea of how rough life must have been before modern comforts like gas and electricity. I dated a woman who had a 17-year-old pose of a son. He dropped out of high school, refused to work or contribute to the household, stole from and bullied his younger sibling, constantly stole money including the mortgage payment at one point, and even punched his mother in the face when confronted about it. She turned to me begging for help, but refused to involve the police because she didn't want to damage any chance at a future he might have. So on the day of his 18th birthday I took her to the courthouse and we started a legal eviction process. About a week later he served the eviction notice signed by a judge, by a sheriff's deputy bright and early, while he's still in bed, giving him 20 days to vacate. For the next 20 days he makes zero effort to prepare, because he assumes his mother is bluffing. I too thought she might relent. On the 20th day she calls the sheriff's deputies and has him formally trespassed right there on the spot. I was there that day and the look of shock on his faking face was priceless. You people have no idea what that woman went through. She showed real strength that day. Even his younger sister was glad he was going. The deputies tell him to vacate immediately or go to jail, so he packs as much of his belongings as he can carry into 2 trash bags and leaves, crying like a faking baby the whole time. He ends up homeless for almost a year until he finally finds work through a day labor service and is able to turn that into a full-time job with a construction company. Now he's somewhat self-reliant, working on a jet and trying to mend his relationships. He's still a little prick, but at least he's trying. I was playing flag football in PE. The other guy tied the flag to his belt. I fell when diving for his flag, but it wrapped around my ring finger and pulled and twisted the finger. It was so cold outside, I didn't think anything of the pop because there was no pain. It swelled, but I figured it bothered the joint. 30 minutes later, when we went inside and the pain began, I went to the school nurse who gave me an ice pack. My fingernail was pointing to my pinky finger. She called my mom and said she was sorry to bother her, but she had to call home for injuries, but I'd probably bent my finger wrong and I'd be fine. My mom had no reason to not believe her. I went through the rest of the day as the finger swelled and the whole thing turned black blue. All my teacher sent me to the nurse, but she doubled down that I was fine and then called my mom again saying I was fine and just looking to get out of class. It was at that point my mom came and got me because I didn't behave that way. She took one look at my finger and we went to the hospital. I had 2 surgeries, pins, and an 8-week cast. I have never seen my mom so angry. She personally called every school board member and started at 9:15 that night. She said sorry to wake you, but then said she wouldn't have had to call them if the nurse had done her job. When I came back to school, we had a new nurse, and I was excused from any PE, including alternate assignments, while my broken finger healed. Fun times. My parents were generally very good at not doing this sort of thing, but there was one time. So my family is in the middle of move to an apartment. My dad asked me to come with him and my mom to take insurance pictures of the place since I was the photographer of the family. I told him I didn't feel well. He thought I was bullshitting, but less than 20 minutes after he left I started sheeting myself incessantly. Made it to the toilet though. When they got back a couple of hours later I was sheeting and vomiting. I couldn't drink water without vomiting. Anyway they went to bed lol and told me to just get some sleep and wait it out. I couldn't move without sheeting myself. The point I woke up my parents a couple of times with my moaning in pain, to which they tried to get me to quiet down. By 2 AM I was lying on the floor unable to move, though still making a fair bit of noise. At that time, my mom was tired of my whining and called the nurse hotline to prove to me there's nothing to worry about so that I would stop asking for help. The nurse was mortified that I hadn't been taken to the emergency room hours ago, since I hadn't been about to drink water for like 7 hours at this point and was extremely dehydrated. The nurse heavily chastised my mom lol. So she drives me to the hospital and they hook me up with fourths, and it was probably the most satisfying sensation I've ever felt. I passed out immediately and woke up a few hours later feeling much better. I got to take a few days off school after that. Finally got to watch Doctor Strangelove. Anyway this one's not as bad as the others because my parents aren't monsters, but they can be unempathetic at times lol. Not to mention their tendency to underestimate sickness in young people. Honestly I feel a lot of schadenfreude looking back, knowing my mom didn't get any sleep while I was passed the fuck out lol. My dad got off easy though lol, he just slept through it all. Good times. Not to mention that it was genuinely interesting to experience such a close call with death that was only avoided thanks to a persuasive nurse lol. Point my parents have since then taken gastroenteritis much more seriously lol. Before I entered kindergarten I only spoke Spanish. Going into kindergarten, I was surrounded by just English speakers. I don't regret learning Spanish as my first language. But it was so unfair how my parents automatically expected me to know English. When I would get my packets of HW, I would start crying. I didn't understand what it was asking for, and I couldn't turn to my parents for help either. Instead of finding someone to help me, I was screamed and hit at for not knowing English. They bought these cards with names of colors and shapes. I was put in the ground while they sat on the couch looking down at me. I was hit if I couldn't pronounce the names and I honestly hated the entire experience. Eventually I did learn how to swim. I say my thanks to Sesame Street and all the PBS programs. Without them it would have taken longer to learn English. Another experience was how to ride a bike. I didn't learn until I was 13, once again by myself. When I was 7 they took me out to teach me. I fell once and boom. My dad started screaming at me how useless and dumb I was. My mom didn't say anything. My parents didn't even help me up. My dad left and my mom said to stop crying and to go back to the house. It was my first time on a bike. I don't know what he expected from me. When my sister was born, I decided to teach her English and how to properly ride a bike, plus other things. I didn't want her to go through what I went through. When riding a bike I always saw parents holding on to their kids and then letting them go, helping them up, and encouraging them to try again when they fell. My dad isn't one of those people, so I knew I couldn't count on him to teach my sister. Proud to say I taught her how to ride a bike. I had fallen into a neighbor's swimming pool as a 4-year-old and lost consciousness as I sank. Luckily the lady of the house saw it happen shortly after and rescued then resuscitated me. This was 45 years ago when it was common to let your kids wander at large and before pool fencing became a legal requirement in my state. I was left with a righteous fear of water, but still my parents didn't do much to make sure I learned to swim or overcome my fear. We owned a speedboat my family would take out every weekend of summer, and all the kids wore life jackets. My siblings happily learned to ski and kneeboard and I was okay with sitting as far away from sight as possible as I knew my father would otherwise force me to have a go. I'd sit in the tube and be pulled along but anything else brought me to silent, white-faced panic. This drove my father crazy. He was a huge, muscular man, a bully and often violent, and should never have been around children. He couldn't handle having a weak child, so one day he literally hauled me up by the top of my life jacket. I was a skinny little 7-year-old, and threw me out into the water maybe 10 meters away. No one was allowed to help me get back into the boat, and adding to my struggles I was wearing an adult-sized jacket, so it was lifting up, and I was sliding out of it at the deepest part of the river. It was common law that, if you sank under the water they wouldn't be able to find your body, because the water was so brown. Usually drownings were found days later trapped downstream in reeds. I was nearly hysterical, but somehow made my way back fighting the current, the jacket and my inability to swim. Needless to say I never overcame my fear, and even as a nearly 50-year-old, I have an unsettledness even in bath water over my chest. My father is an avid outdoorsman, and for one spring break we went on my very first ice climbing trip. Now to be truthful, I do like ice climbing now, but you wouldn't know it back then. We were on a very basic beginner run that was literally right next to the highway, as in be driving on the road, and there was a large cleared area clearly for parking. Anyways, I was quite nervous and unsure as to what to do. We hadn't done any practice prior to the trip, and I hadn't even put any crampons on before this. So here I'm maybe only like 20 feet in the air, calves aching because I don't understand the concept of letting my toes support my full weight. All the while, my ungloved hands feel like they are on fire from the cold. I can't make it. I rappel down, holding back tears. I tell my dad how cold my hands are, and my dad says, well, just go and warm your hands up in the car then. To which I do, but as soon as I get in the car, I finally break down and bawl out, literally screaming in the car with how bad my hands hurt. Not paying attention, I'm surprised when my dad opens the door and says, what the hell are you doing in here? What's all this noise? Trying to save face, I just tell him how bad my hands were hurting and that I wasn't aware of how loud I was. He tells me that I need to calm down and that I need to try again. If I don't, then it means I'll never get the courage to do it. So after about 10 minutes my hands finally start to get some feeling back, and honestly I was so mad at the situation that I slapped my gear back on, and then, and I can only describe it like this, I proceed to hate climb my way to the top. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? You did that way faster than last time. Cut to me at various points in my life. Yeah, for some reason my hands will sometimes just get unbelievably hot, like it feels like they are on fire or covered in needles. And moments like this is where I'll find some cold metal to grab. It usually was the metal legs to my school desk. I have no idea if those things are related, but I do have a very distinct memory as an adult going over my hand pain to my mom and her being apparently unaware of it all these years. To which my dad replied from the other room, oh, you've always had that ever since you were a kid. My great uncle had a dog that was an extremely aggressive Rottweiler mix. It absolutely hated kids and had attacked several before. This was early 90s. I still don't know how the dog wasn't euthanized. He only barely tolerated most adults and had given 2 men stitches. My uncle swore up and down that the dog had saved his life and would never have it put down. For whatever reason, he insisted on bringing it down to the family visits at his dad's, my great grandpa's, house and leaving it in the backyard while the kids played in the front. I was getting good at climbing trees, encouraged to climb by my dad, but I wasn't confident about coming down. It was okay, though. I was enjoying jumping into my dad's arms. I didn't often get one-on-one time with him or my mother, divorced, and it was really special to me. I used to believe my dad was a prince. I was maybe 6. Anyway, my dad never told me to stop climbing up if I needed help down. Honestly, he was encouraging me to climb, so I thought we were playing a game. Then all of a sudden, when I'm up in the tree and ready to jump to him, he just gets stone-faced and walks away. He says, figure out how to get down on your own. He walked away, and I was there for maybe 45 minutes, sobbing. Then my uncle says, hey, let me show you the dog. At this point I'm sure they'd forgotten me in the tree. They unlatch the gate and let the dog out, who instantly goes to the tree and starts growling/jumping for my ankles. I'm screaming. My great uncle, grandpa, and dad just talk about the dog like he's some prize horse, totally ignoring me. Look at him jump, got good legs. After maybe an hour, at this point I'm holding desperately to the tree and nearly losing my grip because I've tried to climb higher, away from the dog. They put the dog away. Great. Dad will surely get me down now. Nope. They all went back inside. Maybe 15 minutes later my stepmom comes rushing out. She wordlessly takes me down from the tree. I remember her shaking and thinking she was cold. Now I understand it was pure rage. I worked with pregnant and parenting teens many years ago. A new girl joined our program. She was barely 13 and on her second pregnancy. The first one was an abortion. Her mother, and I use that term loosely, refused to allow her to get another abortion or go on birth control after the first one because she made her bed and she needs to lie in it and she didn't learn from the first one, so maybe she'll learn from this one. Yeah. That mom struggled 100 times more than any other teen mom participant. The baby was left with basically anyone who showed the least bit of interest, like said, "Oh, your baby is so cute," friends, family members, sometimes almost total strangers. We had events for moms that naturally included their babies, and the baby was often dirty, unbathed in dirty clothing with an old nasty diaper, and starved for attention. Never enough for child services to actually remove the baby from the home. As the baby became a toddler, unsurprisingly she had significant behavioral issues with the child, and often said it was because her child was just a bad kid. The mom eventually ended up in prison as an adult, along with her younger sister. Not sure what happened to the baby, as I moved on to another position before the baby reached preschool age. So many of the teen mothers in that program came from neglectful or abusive homes, with parents who had little or no clue how to constructively parent a child. And so the cycle often repeated itself. Very few of the teen moms had someone who supported or encouraged them as people, let alone as moms. There were a few who were attentive and loving mothers with their child, but they were the exception rather than the rule. Yes, they loved their children, but that's different than being a loving mother. Sorry for bad English, it's my second launch. So my family has a big garden which has a house. That house is like a motel that my dad made, and doing the busing. There were lots of idiots, one of them even taked him to lawsuit, but did not win. One day a family came, 3 child and 2 parents. They said that they were going to be here for a month or so. That 1 month become 4 months. Anyways, the parents were absolute dog sheets. So the garden we had was kinda like a farm, and we had horses, so we had hay bales as well to give them food. These 2 parents sent the 2 kids outdoors alone. Have to say one of them is 8 years old, the other 4 years old, and the last one I don't know, but around 3, 6. We weren't home that day, we went to somewhere to eat and hiking. These 3 child faking get all of the hay bales all around the garden. We had 5 hay bales. When we came home we were in absolutely shocked because that's a lot of hay bales. All the garden was cave red in hay bales. When we asked them what happened because the kids were outside, they just ran into the house. Now this is the first story. The second is that we heard a loud kid scream. We were like, shit, what happened? Turns out it was the 8-year-old kid hitting his sibling with a bamboo stick, which we also have there. And you know what was the worst part about this? The dog sucking dicker's beach faker cunt loaf of bread dad was standing there smoking a faking cigarette. What a faking twat. The third story is not one story, it happened multiple times, but it's worth mentioning. Every week our ambulance was there at the house, cause the kid did something stupid, but none of the time they had to take him to the hospital. Well, that's my answer. I have a few. When I was about 11 or 12 I dislocated my knee for the first time at home with my siblings and my dad. I was screaming in pain and my brothers were freaking out seeing it. I ended up pushing the kneecap back into place and my dad refused to take me to the doctor because I was fine now and made me walk inside and wait for my mother to get home and deal with me. I had to walk from the paddock all the way back to the house with a freshly dislocated knee and with no help from him at all, as he said I was fine and needed to get over it. I also used to get this debilitating pain in my back that would radiate around my abdomen so bad I could hardly breathe. I used to lie on the ground and try to stretch my back to stop the pain, but it was and still is the worst thing I've ever experienced. Each time I had a flare up dad would tell me to get over it while I was moaning and trying to breathe on the floor. His lack of empathy and refusal to help me with my pain and my many subsequent knee dislocations is one of the main reasons I don't have a relationship with him now. He was the same way with my brother who ended up needing kidney surgery because his pain was ignored for too long and he was told to just get over it. Basically, if he couldn't see anything wrong with you then there was nothing wrong with you, even if you were crying out on the floor in pain. The absolute worst parenting style ever. Actually, my boyfriend has a story. It wasn't parenting. It was for a job. So at our old job, the freezer department head was a no-show / no call for one day. So the boss decided to fire him and said, "Hey John, wanna be department head?" Not his real name. And since he was the only one aside from the old department head, he had no choice but to go for it. There was no help. He asked to be trained, and boss decided to quickly show him how to deal with throwaways, and that was it. He was on his own. He legit asked, "Is this my entire training?" And she said yup. Incoming inventory. He had never dealt with inventory before and asked for help. Boss lady said he already knew what to do, even though he admitted that he has never done it before. Day after inventory, boss was pissed, yelled at him for doing such a terrible job. He straight up said, "I told you I've never done inventory before." John here says that the look on her face went from furious to calm so fast, it was scary. She simply said, "Oh, so it's my fault," and walked away. This wasn't even the only instance. She constantly yelled and ridiculed John for not doing his job correctly, even though he had no training whatsoever. Eventually he quit and got a job that paid him better. Recently we learned that she had paid $12 an hour for John to lead a largest department, but was paying his friend who was in deli about $16 an hour, which the deli was half the size of freezer. She had some serious favoritism going on. My parents sheltered me, protected me from a lot of the reality of life growing up. They gave me an amazing childhood that I took for granted because of it. Then again, if it hadn't been for that childhood I likely wouldn't be here today. I graduated high school and they'd decided for me that I wouldn't go to any of the universities I'd applied and been accepted to. Instead I'd go to community college with impacted classes and pay for it by getting 2 part-time jobs. Wouldn't have been a bad plan if the classes weren't impacted, because everyone was doing it. I couldn't get classes and they got upset I wasn't going to school. So in a fit of insanity and youthful ignorance, I joined the Marine Corps. If this wasn't bad enough, I got talked into the reserve. If I ever see my recruiter again I'll go to prison. Smiling. A reservist gets all the expectation and pressure of serving without the pay, the training, or the benefits. We are still expected to do the same job though, and if you bumblefuck it, you get the same punishments anyway after basic, MCT, and RNC school, which isn't nearly enough to get you up to speed and working on whatever you need to work on. They send you home. I get home. Everything's great, right? No. Turns out I still can't get a decent job. End up doing the same old security shit I'd always done, making minimum wage and losing sleep. To make matters worse, I lose 3 shifts a month to make $150 driving 180 plus miles to Camp Pendleton. I tried to get into school only to find out that even though I was accepted to college, Micah wouldn't sign off on transfer orders for another unit so I could attend. Not that it mattered, because the GI Bill you get as a reservist only covers $300 a year to go to school. It was right about then my parents sold the house and left me without a place to live. So now I was serving the country, but homeless, living out of my shitty CRV and making minimum wage at a part-time job. Nearly killed myself, it got so bad. Ended up selling gear so I could survive. Sold my blues a few weeks before the ball because I needed the money and it was a hot item. I could afford haircuts and would show up overgrown and nasty. The only uniform I could afford were the ones that I'd been given at boot camp, and they barely held themselves together after boot. Let alone the 6 more years of service I had to give. I won't even talk about the hazing. It happened a lot, but that's honestly not what affected me the worst. It was the full-on screaming matches my NCOs would have, because they just couldn't understand the level of hardship I was going through. I got so used to being chewed up and spit out I would just break down and either get angry and belligerent or just go numb and zone out. I was always looking over my shoulder, constantly alert, because I knew at any minute someone would pull me to the side and tear into me for something I couldn't control and could no longer even attempt to voice reason for. The Pish I still see was convinced I saw combat from the level PTSD, anxiety and depression I showed when I started seeing him. 6 years of that. The moment they said I could, I stripped and ran. I didn't even collect my DD215, reserve variant of the DD214. It's been 2 years since I was officially released. My first year and quarter, I had legitimate delusion and was terrified of everyone. Now I'm doing a bit better. I managed to get job working in aviation, sorta secretary work, and I've moved on from there. Continuing that line of work. I do better when I can communicate through text. I don't do well talking to people in person. I tear up randomly and start to shake, especially in groups. Don't join the military, folks, and if you have to, whatever you do, don't join the reserve. Parents, I know it's difficult to continue supporting a grown child because that's what you are at 18 to around your mid-20s, despite what they think, but I've talked to my dad about it a few times and he's confided in me his biggest regret in life was not sending me to college when I got accepted. He saw firsthand a lot of what I went through and the results. He would offer help when he could, but couldn't support me because of my uncle, I assume, but that's another story. I don't personally blame him or my mother despite her attitude towards me. Could I have made better choices? Probably, but I couldn't see a lot of them, and by the time I realized the mistakes I'd made, it was far too late. I'm so fucking tired, guys. Edit. TLDR. Sheltering your kid can be more dangerous to them than letting them learn to make choices and get hurt as kid. Mistakes cost less when you're younger and save for college. Even if they don't seem interested, they just don't know it yet. Well, my mother is a narcissist who struggles with empathy, and my father had no father and his mother abandoned him at 16 or 17, so they meant well, but neither of them really understood how to teach me anything. Sometimes they would get it right, and I've got plenty of good memories of them teaching me things the right way, but there's also plenty of things I still don't understand how to do, as I was just told to figure it out, so I tend to have funny holes in my understanding of things that don't make much sense. My parents taught me all about sex, with boys and girls, in detail, and am very comfortable and confident sexually now, but not a word about dating, love, talking to people, what's expected of me in a relationship, or even how to take a compliment. I have a super active sex life, and in the circles I hang out in, people seem to find me pretty attractive, but to this day I've never so much as been on a date, and if you compliment me on the littlest thing, I turn red as a tomato and laugh nervously until I remember how to talk. Luckily plenty of people find that to be really cute, but I hate it so much. When my mom gave me the talk about drugs, she made sure I knew, realistically, without any extra fear-mongering, what the safe drugs and the dangerous drugs were, and that even good drugs, like weed or LSD, can be very dangerous if you use them wrong. She tried her best to tell me how everything she'd ever tried was supposed to feel, so I knew what to expect and when to be concerned. Told me how to get rid of the spins and when to just go make myself vomit. She explained strains of weed and that I should avoid synthetic weed. Everything, and I'm so glad I know all that stuff. But now when I smoke with her, and I don't know how to hit a bong, pack a bowl, or how to portion out how much is okay for me to smoke, which is very important, she just says things like, just pull it, or just take a couple hits. My mom had me hit a faking massive homemade gravity bong my first couple times I asked to smoke with her, and it took me a long time and a lot of vomiting to realize that is just way too much weed for me. It took me 3 days to figure out I was smoking a joint wrong, and by that time I'd smoked half of it. My dad has been a professional truck driver for over 20 years. He paints the lines on the road and has very good at what he does. He's taught other people how to drive before. He has a perfect driving record, and the one accident he's ever been in, which was not his fault, didn't even involve another driver. My mother also has a perfect driving record, but she's been hit by multiple drunk drivers, killed her first new car by never once having the oil changed, and instead of just buying another car, she paid $9,000 of my dad's money to replace the entire engine. She's a scared driver with absolutely no car knowledge beyond how to actually drive. Take a wild guess who taught me how to drive. I'm a pretty good driver now, but that mostly because I spent 5 months working with my dad and watching him drive. Before that I was super anxious behind the wheel, and I almost got in several accidents because my mom couldn't help but distract me at the wheel to complain about my driving. My parents weren't neglectful, but they did have a lot of faith in my ability to figure stuff out. It always worked out, but sometimes in retrospect my father will say, "Gee, I'm glad no social workers witnessed me letting my 2-year-old operate a pancake griddle," or whatever. One which stands out is the day I learned to feed a baby. I was 9, and we went over to a neighbor's house to give them a congrats on the new baby card. It was about 10 or 11 a.m. The mom answered the door in tears. It turned out the baby hadn't eaten since the night before, so nobody had slept, and she was at her absolute wit's end. Before I could react she said, "Want to hold her?" and dropped this week-old kid in my arms, bottle and all. Then she left the room in tears. Dad appraised the situation and said, "Support the baby's head and watch for bubbles coming up through the milk. That's how you know she's getting some from the nipple. I'm going to take her older brother over to our house for breakfast while these parents get a little break." Then he scooped up their 5-year-old and left. So that put me, a 4th grader, in the position of being alone with a dehydrated, colicky newborn while her parents had a good cry in another room. I kinda shrugged and said, "Okay kiddo, let's try to calm down and drink this bottle now." Lo and behold, the baby actually calmed down and started to drink. I guess she'd been reacting to all the stress in the room from her sleepless parents, and she relaxed once they left. I don't know. I only know that I had the bare minimum of knowledge on feeding a baby and none whatsoever on how to burp her. But it had fallen to me, so I had to soldier on. Luckily the grandma came over from across the street about 20 minutes later and rescued us. In Washington we have a ferry system that connects the islands in the Puget Sound. I was the youngest by quite a few years, and honestly, they were just done parenting. So, we were in my parents' RV, waiting in one of those mile-long lines to board the ferry. My parents decided to walk up to a restaurant and have some drinks while we waited. The problem is that the line moves forward when a ferry is loaded. Dad left the keys in the ignition and told me to move the RV forward when the line moves. I was 14, but I had been driving on rare occasions since I was 10. A car on deserted country roads, not an RV in a busy environment. So, I sat in the driver's seat, my dog in the passenger seat, and waited, hoping my parents would be back before the next ferry arrived. Nope. I see the ferry docking in the distance. Everyone was starting their cars, and there was absolutely no choice. I had to faking drive the faking RV. I started it up, but my foot on the brake, and pulled down the lever to the D symbol. I slowly took my foot off the brake, and just let the RV roll forward, hoping I wouldn't need to hit the gas. Nope, I had to use the accelerator. Christ. Okay, not too much gas. Okay, we are okay. Then the person ahead of me stops. Hit the brakes. Okay. A little rough and my dog wasn't thrilled, but we made it. Phew. Everyone turned their cars off, so I moved the lever to the P and turned the keys. Sweet holy Jesus. I took a deep breath. My parents would be back any minute, and dad will take over, right? Nope. And by the way, my mom refused to drive the RV, but I guess it was okay for her 14-year-old daughter. So I waited, assuming my parents would be back any second. More waiting. Where the hell are they? Then, in the distance, I see it. The ferry. It's approaching the dock. It blows its massive horn. Okay, I can do this. I moved the RV once. I can do it again. Engine start, and once again the line moves forward. It keeps going and going. I get down to ferry and realize that I was going to have to drive the faking massive RV onto the ferry. The guys in orange vests don't mess around. They point to a lane, and you drive into that lane. I accelerate onto the ramp and a guy points to a lane, and I just faking geo. It's dark and cramped, my dog is barking, and somehow I managed to drive the RV like an adult and park it. Then I realized that my parents were not on the ferry. Cars were still loading. I waited, thinking about what I was going to do when we arrived on the other side. Then I see my dad's face at the driver's side windows. I open the door, and he says, "You did it, kid. Put the emergency brake on while we are on the ferry." I was shaking, sweaty, and all I got was a "Good job, kid." I knew at that point my parents were not regular parents. TLDR, I was shoved into the pool when I was 3 and got very close to death, discovering that drowning is actually a really peaceful and relaxing way to die. I was never thrown in the pool to learn to swim. I snuck out with my Down syndrome uncle. I was 3, he was 5, and we stacked boxes to climb over the gate to get to the pool at my grandparents' house. Looking down into the pool with no adult supervision, he shoved me in. Up until now has been adults who told me what happened. I don't remember anything myself before I was pushed in. I remember the water coming straight towards me almost in slow motion. Then I felt like my whole body was stabbed with ice before it was like having a cool breeze. I remember everything being a literal sea green underwater, and the whole time it was getting darker. All I knew was kicking and moving your arms made you swim, and so I was trying everything to get myself to float, eventually figuring out doggy paddling, but I was still underwater. The inside of my chest was getting really cold and the cold was spreading down to my stomach on the inside. I started to get really tired, and I remember thinking I was going to fall asleep in the water. I started to forget that I was trying to swim and would just float there feeling ready to go to sleep. Then I remembered I needed to swim and kept fighting before I forgot where I was or that I was dying. It was actually incredibly peaceful. There was no pain. I was forgetting I was supposed to be even panicking, and overall it was really nice, calm, and even comforting. And so I quit fighting. It was okay. I could just fall asleep and enjoy the peace. I was extremely happy where I was. I very vaguely remember someone grabbing my arms and pulling me out. I remember watching the water between us getting clearer while they held on to me. I remember the very calming and comforting warmth of everything and how bright the light was. I remember being held against their chest and feeling very intense love for them. The world was paradise. I was more calm and relaxed than I ever have been as I fell asleep against their chest. I still have no clue who saved me, but their shirt was white and had red on the front. 13 years later, I still feel a similar peace come to me when I look at water, but as soon as I get close to the edge I begin to panic and have flashbacks, if you can call it that, of the moments after I was pushed in. I absolutely love swimming, but I can't handle having my head underwater or jumping in. I did manage to get my swimming merit badge in Boy Scouts, but for the first swim check I panicked, choked, and then panicked even more before I was very quickly saved by a lifeguard. Did the test again and passed without even a breeze. At the point where they wanted us to dive for rocks at the bottom of the river about 10 feet under, I physically couldn't do it. I tried repeatedly, but every time would panic and have to come back up. Miraculously the instructor forgot who had actually done it, and I just didn't say anything. So I mostly earned my swim badge. I realize this isn't quite what the question was asking, but it's what I've got. My parents had this as their whole as parenting style. They would teach me nothing, put me in situations requiring knowledge I didn't have, and when, predictably, I faked it up, simply rectify the situation while expressing deep existential disappointment with me as a human being for not having magically acquired complex knowledge immediately. Example, second summer from college was coming up. My parents sent me a letter mentioning that this summer I was going to get not only a job, as I had the last 4 summers, but an apartment. My folks live in SF. I'm in school in Massachusetts school. I thought, not unreasonably, my folks are actually going to teach me some life skills. I'll get home, we are gonna sit down, and they'll walk me through the process of finding and applying for a place, where to look, etc. Nope. When my usual plane ticket didn't arrive, with 2 days left in the semester, I called mom. "Didn't you get our letter?" she asked. I replied that I did, and that I was excited. "Oh no, son, you were supposed to do that on your own. Like, already, it is 1988, mom. How the fuck am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to find a job and an apartment in San Francisco from Amherst faking MA?" Next day, my ex-Marine older brother, 20 years my senior, shows up at my dorm room, a firm believer in bootstraps who gave me Rush Limbaugh books for Christmas the year before, drives me out to the middle of nowhere, and tells me to get out of the car. He then throws me the keys and tells me to drive us back to the college. Point now, I had gone to boarding school since I was 13 and had not driven a car since driver's ed when I was 16. Like I'm going to again magically figure out safe motor vehicle operation, because all I really need is more traumatizing at this point. I get in the driver's seat and within 3 minutes he tells me to pull over before I get us killed, and he drives us back in angry silence. He tells me he's come to take me back to his place, also in CA, and that he's going to get me to straighten up and fly right. After he leaves, a friend tells me that there are summer jobs on campus, housing included. I jump at the chance, and by the time my brother shows up the next day, I'm gainfully employed at the dining hall with a housing assignment. He blows a gasket, makes me call my folks, they blow a gasket. I explain that this was exactly what they wanted me to do. Everyone throws their hands up, and my brother leaves in a huff, angry that I wasted his time. Somehow, even in completing the stated goal, I have miserably failed the exercise. Look, I was a sheltered, privileged kid, to be sure. A lot of this stuff, kids learned far earlier. But I had the kind of parents who gave me a hand-me-down bike and left it up to me to figure out how to ride the thing. And they did that with everything. I literally cannot recall a single life skill either of my parents taught me. Not shaving, not shoelace tying, not driving, dancing, anything. Except, ironically, learning to swim, for which they took me to swim lessons. Oh shit, story time. When dad decided he was going to teach me a lesson when I was 15, this was long before cell phones were a thing. I was notorious for having to run back in the house for something I forgot, or back into a restaurant for a jacket, or into school for a book. We were on vacation at the beach, 3 hours from home. Car is packed to come home. We are pulling out, and I remember the fake Oakley sunglasses I bought were hanging on a chair by the pool. I yell that I'm running back across the condo place to get them. Dad yells that he isn't waiting. If I go get them he's leaving me, and for me to figure out my own way home. I take off at a sprint, find my sunglasses and run back, maybe 4 minutes tops. I get back, the car is gone. I know which way they would have gone when they left, so I start running in that direction, fully expecting them to be stopped just up the road. I ran until I was out of breath, no car. I start to panic just a bit, because I know I'm in trouble and I think they were probably still at the condo place and I missed them, so I walk back trying not to hyperventilate. They aren't there. I panic and for some dumbass reason decide the best thing to do is to find a ride to the gas station at the state line 30 minutes away, because we always stopped at that station on the way home. I managed to get a carload of college kids heading that way to take me. We get there, no family. Just sheer coincidence that I happened to see a couple from my hometown that I recognized. I'd never met them, but I'd seen them around. I told them what was going on. They wanted to call the police. I begged them not to because I thought I would be in even more trouble. They made a couple of calls then agreed to take me home. Even at 15 I could tell that they were really holding back their anxiety over this, and for 2 hours home it was really quiet. We get to my house. My heart is racing knowing my dad is gonna be furious. Lights are all off. The couple won't leave me there by myself, so eventually I get them to take me a couple of miles down the road to my aunt's house. I knock. She opens the door, screams and grabs me. My uncle comes running out, and my grandmother and everyone is freaking out wanting to know where I've been and how I got home. Turns out when my dad said he was leaving me, they had just driven around the block. I took off running up the road before they got back. When they couldn't find me they went looking, and we just missed each other. After half an hour my mom insisted that they get the police involved. The entire police force at the beach was looking for me. There were volunteers walking the beaches trying to find me. They'd let my uncle know what was going on, and he had told the rest of the family. 2 other uncles were already on the way down to the beach. There was absolute pandemonium going on at the beach. The couple who had given me the ride home quietly ducked the fuck out. I spent the next 4 hours evaluating my life, assuming it was going to be over as soon my parents got home. When they got there, my mom immediately rushed over to me and hugged me. My dad checked on me and started unloading the car. The whole family sat around and discussed what had happened. I think what actually saved me is that my dad's two brothers thought the fact I'd outsmarted my dad was hilarious, and they would not stop giving him shit over it. And I guess it worked. I never left anything behind again. 2 stories, but one of them isn't exactly a throw him in the pool. The other is I used to wear a floating ring. One day, my brother wanted to use it, and my dad insisted I could go one day without it. So I did. I discovered that day I could actually walk in the shallow end, and got really happy. Unfortunately, my mind had no concept of deep end, and so I thought surely I could walk throughout the whole pool. I couldn't. Thankfully, the end of the pool, where I lost my footing, was the end my dad was sitting. He saw me, extended his hand to me, who was splashing helplessly like a fish out of water, and I took it. I'd nearly drowned, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. He cut the pool trip short and took us back home, where I promptly vomited. This was definitely a throw him in the pool moment, but not from my parents, who quite frankly knew better. Oh, no. This one was from a camp counselor. And not the pool. No, that's kid stuff. He threw me in the sea. We were at the beach, and he decided he'd had it with my hydrophobia, and decided the only way to cure it was to force me to face it. So, he grabbed me, walked over to the deeper area, and released me. Luckily, my very pissed off brother was right behind, rampaging through the water after him with a floating kickboard. When he released me, my brother threw me the kickboard, got me to shallower waters, and I got out. I was so angry at the awful guy, and that particular guy never bothered to speak to me again. Some people are just psychopaths. Don't know how to swim. You die. Both experiences contribute to what is now phobia of the deep end of anywhere really. Bathtubs, shower, shallow pools okay. But ocean, sea, deep end of the pool. I get nervous, fidgety, and trust literally nobody. This wasn't my parents. It was my swim teacher. She wasn't a very nice woman to begin with, but her method of teaching probably wouldn't fly today. She would teach us how to dive by having us jump feet first into the deep end and keep swimming down until our feet touched the bottom of the pool. She would then look down, and if she didn't think that you had touched the bottom, she would simply push you back down with her hand as you neared the surface. She would do this as many as 2-3 times, or at least 3 was the maximum I can remember getting. It was always a fraught experience, worrying as you slowly drifted back to the surface if she would shove you back down to the murky depths. Her most controversial issue was that she hated crying. If you hurt yourself in the pool, no tears. If you wanted to get out or were upset, no tears. The instant that a child started crying, she would immediately order the parent out of the room. There were chairs for parents set up along the perimeter of the pool. The parent would go upstairs and look out of a glass window, so they were in sight of the child, but can't hear anything. Jill would then lift you under the arms, shake you, and shout in your face, "Stop crying." If you didn't immediately halt, then she would proceed to dunk you under the water and hold you down, so you would run out of air. Then she would lift you back up, gasping and spluttering, and if you resumed crying, she would shove you back under the surface again, and for a longer period of time. She would continue this method of shaking, screaming, and dunking you until you were either too out of breath to cry or just gave up. Many a parent would walk back into the room irate and tell Jill to knock it off and then take their crying child out of her lessons. But those of us regulars were used to new students dropping out regularly due to issues like this. We didn't know if you would stay until you cried and got a dose of Jill's correction. It's a miracle that I still love swimming as much as I do, given that I was subject to Jill's corrections many times before my parents finally switched me over to an exorbitantly expensive country club for lessons. But to this day I don't enjoy diving or going to the bottom of the pool. I have really bad allergies. This story will explain how bad they are. I hate yard work because of my allergies. My parents, father especially, were very abusive and chalked it up to me being lazy, despite the fact that my own father never did yard work because of his allergies. One weekend I was staying at my grandmother's house. She would hire an older boy to do the yard work once or twice a month. My father came by earlier than expected and saw the boy doing yard work and got pissed. My father told the boy to leave, paid him twice what he expected, and then went inside and dragged me out to the yard while screaming about how fucking lazy I am. He then ordered me to finish the yard work, despite there already being hives on my chest and neck due to the grass and pollen in the air. Within 20 minutes I was bleeding out of my mouth and nose, my body covered with hives, rashes and blisters. My father and grandmother yelled at each other, which was the last thing I remembered, before waking up in a hospital room that night. They kept me under observation for 48 hours. The entire time my father complained about how much this would cost him. When I was discharged, my mother drove me home by herself. Neither of us said anything. The one thing my father said to me the day I came home was, "You'll never get over those allergies if you don't go outside." But I guess you like being a little bossy, coming from the same guy that has the same excuses to why he doesn't do yard work. My mother had her own sick twist on this. She was a horrific woman who hated and terrorized me my entire childhood. I don't know what she said to me. I literally have no memories of any conversations between us when I was little. Just flashes of absolute fear. We got to the pool where lessons were, and the first thing they wanted us to do was to climb the ladder to the slide and then slide down to the water. Not a little kid slide, so probably 8 to 10 feet tall. I was already terrified of heights, so that was a no-go, but I didn't have a choice. I do remember the way she'd pinch the underside of my arm, or just claw at it, when she'd grab me. I made it up the steps and onto the slide, but I was holding on to the lip of the edge so tight that I sliced open all my fingers on the way down. That stopped the lessons for the day, because I was bleeding too badly to be allowed into the water. Never went back there, because I embarrassed her too badly, so rinse and repeated several more pools until she was sick of wasting money on my swimming. In other words, she had accomplished her goal of giving me a lifelong phobia. When my kids were old enough to swim, I told them how much fun they were going to have in the water, and we'd get ice cream after each lesson. And I'd sit in the parents section watching them, cheering them on and sometimes crying, because after all these years the chlorine smell of a pool still gives me a panic attack. My dad once built a chicken coop around when I was 9 and asked me to help him. He asked me to nail a few boards together, but because I never learned to use a hammer prior, I hit my finger a few times and ran off crying. He was super pissed at me, so like any parent would do, he gave us some nails, a hammer, and a wooden plank, and told me, "If you can't get at least 30 nails in this plank while I'm over here building, I'm not taking you to Aj's this weekend." My favorite local restaurant as a kid. It took me about 20 attempts until I got one in, but it had taken me about an hour to do between all the missed attempts and all the crying I did. So I tried for a while until I got about 17 nails, but a few of my fingers had already turned purple and I was well over my emotional breaking point. I eventually got so distressed over it all, I took the other end of the hammer and started prying away at the plank out of frustration. Keep in mind, this was after about 3 hours and I simply had no grasp of consequence. When my dad came and saw what I did, he came in screaming. He said stuff like, "You failed as my son and you have no respect for your family," and some more stuff, but I was too busy having a literal panic attack to notice. Eventually, I got so lightheaded, I passed out, but my dad just didn't care. Apparently, he kept yelling at me to stop pretending to sleep, but when he realized, he got so furious, he kicked a hole in our pantry door. He later rushed me to the hospital and found out I had broken both my wrists and several fingers during my attempts. When asked how I got in this state, he simply didn't have an answer that wasn't absolutely crazy, so he told them it was a bike accident. The nurses didn't believe that in the slightest, and thankfully they made sure there was 20 years separating me from that lunatic. I work with kids for my job. I have access to lots of information on the kids, so we can make sure they are successful. We had one kid who was clearly on the spectrum. I'm not a licensed therapist, but I have worked specifically with people on the spectrum in a similar setting. This one child was displaying fairly common behaviors that one would see in a kid on the spectrum. They were struggling, and so were their group leaders. I checked out their files and saw no extra information on them needed specialized care. I came up with strategies that we would normally apply for kids with ASD, and they worked super well. A guardian came to pick them up, so I pulled the guardian aside to talk about everything on the first day. I mentioned we struggled supporting the kid and asked if they had any strategies that they find work well. The person laughed and said, "Oh, really? That doesn't surprise me." They just kinda ended the conversation there and left. The rest of the week we worked with the kiddo using our techniques for children on the spectrum, and by the end of the week the kid was completely different. We had zero difficulties once we learned how to support them. I kept trying to talk to the guardian and different family members and mention what we did that day, and they were just like, "Oh, that's a good idea." Clearly, the family knew that their child was not neurotypical and either did not want to get a diagnosis or had one and didn't want to let us know. Both of those are absolutely horrible. I check on the kid's file every once in a while to see if they have finally done the right thing for this kid. It boils my blood. From a boss, James Beard award-winning chef. Total as whole. He was unbelievably protective, and as the chef de cuisine, I was only allowed to make slow-selling salads and pass him sauces from the reaching cooler. Pretty useless position. I was only allowed to learn by observation. He refused to explain anything or give any level of training. Anyway, we got slammed one Saturday night, and he saw doing exactly what he allowed me to do being useless. The sous chef was also restricted from learning, so she wasn't able to be as helpful as she should have been on a busy Saturday night. This dumbass noticed we weren't helping, and I guess forgot we were never allowed to help, and he got pissed off at us for not being stressed out enough, so he told us to take over. He wanted us to get him out of the weds that he guided himself into. Not only that, but he walked off of the line and watched us, expecting us to struggle to make his point. The sous chef and I were tight with each other, and we didn't mind stepping up to the plate. We handled it as well as we could have. But the cherry on top was when the sous chef asked, "Could you please pass me this sauce?" He jumped in and said, "We are too busy for manners. No please and thank you." I quit a few weeks later. The sous chef later opened her own restaurant and asked me to be her sous chef and poached the lead server and made her the floor manager. It was beautiful justice. Mom was a throw him to the wolves type of parent. Father was a biker who passed on when I was 5. Stepfather was a drug dealing adult petulant child. At 4, I was given a life jacket and tossed off a 20-foot cliff into the lake to learn how to swim. Literally. Went to 7 different schools. Started enrolling myself in every one after the 3rd grade. Second school on the list after getting dropped off at the front door. Forced to pay bills and have a 40-hour/week job at age 14, not because we needed money, but because it built character, as well as housework 3 times a week, outdoor chores, grass, and garden, mandatory 1-hour study session every afternoon and mandatory 1-hour practice of trumpet every afternoon. Managed to find time to rebuild a Rocket truck and fodder sap. Being 18 and stupid, I got behind on bills and couldn't afford to fill the propane tank before a cold snap. Mother was kind enough to fill the tank, buy me a coat, and some groceries. Nice, right? 3 years later my mother hits me with a yellow post-it and receipts, then insists I pay her back by working on her new house. By working on I mean hanging drywall in the entire house and doing a tongue-in-groove pine ceiling. Easily 2 weeks work and at a $5,000 job if contracted out. For free plus I pay any extra labor. For at $300 that I owed her. I was still broke, working 60 hours a week to pay bills and hate owing anyone anything. So I did the work and paid a guy at $300 for labor. No thank you, no praise. General BS. Next 15 years, nothing nice but still nothing noteworthy, only interact on major holidays. Then my mother-in-law passes away. I'm in my late 30s. Day of the funeral I get a little emotional and give mother a hug and tell her I love her. She calls me a bussy in front of my wife and pushes me off. 4 years later she's begging me to be nice to her. She retired from work and had time to reflect. She won't apologize, belittles or waves off all the evil things I was put through as a child and on into adulthood. I love my mama, but I'll be damned if she ain't a mean old woman. I have a couple of these. My parents were up point, so I used to live in Renton, which is really close to Seattle. Occasionally, we would go to the beach and walk around or swim if it was warm enough. One summer we went, I was maybe 4 or 5, real little, didn't know how to swim. While my mom was sitting like 3 feet away with my baby sister, I was splashing around the shallow end watching my big sister swim out further with her in a tube. I think I asked my mom to help me swim. Now, I don't remember how, but I ended up in deeper water, with my mom standing a few feet away from me in the water. All I remember is kicking furiously, raising my arms up straight, and trying to call for my mom anytime my head bobbed above the water. I remember seeing her standing there watching me. I swallowed so much water. She dragged me out of the water and sat me down on the shore, and I coughed up water, and I was crying. My eyes burned. I'm fairly certain she was trying to teach me how to swim by just dropping me in the water with her. Another instance of this type of teaching method happened when my big sister had gotten hurt and mom was giving her some Advil. They were the liquid gel caps. That's important to remember. I watched mom give my sister one, and, me being 5, I wanted one too. Mom told me I didn't need it, but I kept insisting. I ended up swiping one from her, and I asked how I take it. I asked, do I chew it? And mom shrugged, telling me to figure it out. I popped it in my mouth and bit down on it. Got the taste. The feeling of the cap popping. It was so disgusting. It burned. I immediately spit it out and ran to the bathroom to rinse my mouth. I remember hearing my mom laugh. I was 5. I could go on. My parents were not very good at their job. This is a funny one, and I love my father very much, and I was a little sheet. So, background is my dad was a very young, but a totally present and loving dad when I was 5. Thinking back on my childhood, there are so many moments that I realize he was just a kid growing up at the same time as me, but one time in particular stands out. I was going through a phase of independence and wanted to try everything myself. Didn't believe anyone who told me I can't or I shouldn't, and no was an evil word. We were having a spaghetti feast with a bunch of family friends, and there was a massive bowl of Kraft Parmesan, like the almost powdered kind, on the table, while everyone was waiting for the pasta to be done. I had been eyeing it the whole evening, and getting told no when I tried to sneak some every 5 minutes. My poor parents are just trying to have a nice evening with friends, and they're having to hold me back from the cheese like a rabid dog. Finally my dad got so fed up with my constant whining about the damn cheese, he says fine, grabs a huge serving spoon, and shoves the biggest scoop of parmesan ever straight into my mouth. The next 30 seconds were a blur as I remember my elation turned to horror, while my mouth goes desert dry, and I can't swallow anything. My dad's triumphant face turns to panic as he realizes that he may have just killed his kid with cheese. And, to make matters worse, a few of the female guests had just rounded the corner into the kitchen to grab drinks or something, and were shocked to see me start sobbing with drool and cheese pouring out of my mouth, and my dad holding a spoon just staring in fear. Because my dad was a young male, those female guests started berating him about parenting and fatherhood and generally being totally sexist and condescending while he was cleaning me up in shame. He made up for it with lots of cuddles, and I didn't ask for any more cheese that whole night. We laugh about the story now, but I will never forget the look in his eye while I choked and he got yelled at. Poor guy. Story time. I literally lived this line: throw him in the pool, he'll learn how to swim. 6-year-old me, female by the way, I'm petite now, but as a child I was downright itsy bitsy, the size of a 4-year-old. No big deal. Noggin works just fine. Mom enrolled me in swim class and takes me over. It's at a local home. Instructor is certified, etc. Parents could watch from sliding glass the classes or leave and return. Mine leaves, thanks mom. Classes are structured by age. Somehow in the organized chaos, I'm slid into the advanced level line of kids who have been before and know how to swim. She literally just never saw me point the kids, and I line up, about to take turns on the diving board. Teacher is a bit of a stickler, do this and do it now type. Here comes my turn. I freeze on the board, never been on one before. Teacher, who had been instructing with a flow till now, starts yelling at me to jump. I'm terrified. She grabs a pool skimmer and bumps my bottom. to push me forward. Remember, I'm in the advanced line accidentally. In it, I'm supposed to be able to swim and dive already. She's so busy, she doesn't notice the mix-up, nor does it register seeing me freeze on the board. I get bumped again. Jump. She yells and bumps one last time, pushing me off the board, expecting me to jump and swim like the others. Not so much. I sink immediately. Woman doesn't even send the skimmer in for several moments to grab me. She expects me to hit bottom and pop up. Not happening. I'm actively drowning. At same time, my mom thankfully arrives back and says she scanned the crowd looking for me. When she didn't see me and saw the now growing commotion of why isn't she coming back up, my mom steps onto the patio and sees her kid underwater, drowning. She runs and jumps fully clothed into the pool, pulling me out from the bottom. I'm sputtering but actually somehow held my breath. I had been down approximately a minute and did have to be evaluated at her. We never went back to that swim teacher. I literally sank instead of swam. Before I was diagnosed with extremely severe AD depression, my dad's opinion was I shouldn't have to help him with his homework because he should know what to do if he actually paid attention in class, and that I shouldn't feel bad as often as I did because he is growing up in a life 1000 times better than I did as a kid, and I did fine, which he didn't. He's an extreme alcoholic. After the diagnosis and over a year of me in therapy, his opinion was that psychologists don't actually know anything and psychology is just liberal bullshit. After I realized all of this and I got treatment anyway in the form of further therapy and medication, he screamed at me, called me a junkie, hid my medication once, which is very problematic because of them has to be taken every 24 hours, and said that I'll never get anywhere in life, so I might as well stop trying. When I actually stood up for myself, he got in my face like he was gonna hit me. I don't remember exactly what I said, but gist was, if you are gonna hit me, do it. I may be weaker, but the prisoners who target other prisoners that hurt kids aren't. He backed down and left, of course drinking a beer in the morning, because he realized that I wasn't gonna deal with him anymore. Looking back, I'm shocked I didn't call the police then, and I'm shocked that I actually stood up ready to fight him knowing that I would lose. Now, I'm 18, and once I go to college I don't plan on speaking to him again because of the 18 years of trauma that I'm gonna be living with for a long time. If he has a problem with that, I'm more than happy to write him a book explaining exactly what he's done to me, that his bloodline will end with me, because I will not be having biological kids, and if I even remotely believe that I'm gonna be 0.1% of the father he is, I will not be adopting either. This cycle is ending with me. Probably what happened in junior school. I knew these twin boys, they were born premature and had a few health issues, so the school was supposed to treat anything they had wrong more seriously than anybody else, as a normal sickness to us could make them worse. One day we are at lunch and one of the twins wasn't eating and holding his stomach. He stood up with his brother and they tried to go to first aid. However, we had this dinner lady that was a class a beach at the best of times, and she made them sit back down. She grilled them about what was wrong, and they tried to explain, and this beach went on a massive rant about how they both already had a lot of time off recently, and accused the boy of attention seeking as a way to get out of eating veg. She screamed how him and his brother were big babies and needed to get on with life. Well, the whole time this lad is getting more pale by the second, sweating, and she is trying to force him to eat. He took a mouthful of food and cried and was almost sick. This caused us all at the table to scream at the dinner lady, and she shouted back so bad it alerted other staff. A head of year came and forced the lady to go to the headmaster's office while other staff came to help the lad and calm us all down. The headmaster came, put his hand on the lad's shoulder, and the poor kid vomits blood and drops into the headmaster's arms. Turns out that attention seeking was his appendix needing come out, and he also had a stomach and blood infection. He was okay, and the dinner lady lost her job. My mum was friends with the twins' family, and they told her the hospital had said if they hadn't got him in when he did, he would have died. My large Greek American family was on a trip to visit extended family in Greece when I was 11, and I had to use the bathroom really badly when we were on our way to the airport to head home. My mom thought I was being dramatic when I started crying and begging for us to stop somewhere. Thankfully, I was a winny kid, and I kept at it, and they eventually pulled over at a rest stop. My mom was so mad at me that she didn't stand by the door when I was using the only bathroom at the rest stop, and a middle-aged man opened the door on me when I was diarrheaing all over their old pump toilet. I was crying and trying to clean up while this guy yelled something in Greek at his coworker and closed the door. My mom came running in after and helped me clean up the toilet. She was pissed at me for years for almost making our whole family, 10 plus people, miss a flight home. She didn't understand that I absolutely could not hold it, and I would have had diarrhea in the van if we hadn't stopped. We found out later that I was lactose intolerant, and we had been having so much milk and cheese on the trip. She understands now. Also, she has begun to regret many other parenting situations like that where she didn't listen to my experiences and feelings. Although because of her struggles, I'm really looking forward to raising kids of my own and having her as a much more empathetic grandmother. Things worked out, but that will forever be a situation I have nightmares about. My dad is a little crazy, but I love him, and he means well, even if he is crazy. I didn't live with him, but I spent almost a month or 2 months every year with him, and a handful of weekends. My mom didn't hate him, she just couldn't put up with his antics after 30 years. When I was 8 I fell out of a tree and shattered my arm and wrist in a few places. A few weeks after this, we took a trip to California where we attended a yearly family reunion in Redding/Clear Lake area. Somewhere along the way we stopped and stayed at the Calistoga Springs. All I can recall is I hated their bottled water, but my dad loved it and believed in the healing powers of their waters, amongst other things like my stepmother's healing crystals. So we get there, and they have this pool at the motel we're at, and the water is Calistoga fed, so it's filled with these mystical healing powers. My dad wants me to swim around in the water and see how my arm feels. Being a kid who loves the water, I was at it for hours, and it feels the same as when I got in. Well, now sorta, because even in a cast I'm using it, and it broken in like 5 places. Perplexed that my arm is not better, my father he gathers a kitchen knife and scissors and proceeds to cut this cast off because it must be blocking the healing powers of Calistoga waters. Needless to say, my arm was not healed, and when it swelled to a ridiculous size he admitted defeat and took me to the hospital. Point the upside as I really hated this part of the first cast, and when I explained it to the cast making person they were all over it and helped give me a squarish shaped pocket in my thumb so I could play my Nintendo. So in the end, worked in my favor. My dad proceeded to swear off our mystical healing, and when we got home promptly walked room to room shattering every crystal with a hammer. As I said, he's crazy and mostly harmless, but I do love him to death and learned a lot of lessons from him and his unique perspective. We had a swim coach with that kind of mentality in middle school. A total maniac, but he had a successful career as a swim coach with quite a few awards and tons of gold medals on those he trained and prepared for swim galas. So our school hires him as the official main coach for the boys. One particular day, he made everyone do endurance swimming practices by swimming the length of the pool multiple times. I had one kid in class that was asthmatic, weak and skinny overall, and deathly scared of the deep end. He would do the entirety of the lengths by holding into the side of the pool and dragging himself both ways. The coach didn't like this at all. He got everyone out of the pool and asked him to swim properly in the middle of the pool. The kid would cry and whimper objections, but the coach wasn't having any of it. He picked him up and threw him to the center of the pool's deep end. Point the kid, obviously, immediately began having panic attacks, forgot how to swim and started drowning. One proud kid among us who wanted to impress the coach jumped in and swam to the kid to try to save him, but he faked up. The drowning kid held onto him tightly and used him as a step to keep above water all while drowning the proud kid. Things got so messy. After spazzing out for a few seconds, the coach used the cleaning net pole to save them both. Point super horrible method to teach swimming to anyone. The kid and I are close, and he can swim pretty well now despite the trauma, but it really slowed down his progress. When I was 17, my father had lined up a cheap car for me to buy from a friend of his. When we were driving over to buy it, he was telling me about it. He was like, "It's in great shape, new brakes, great tires, but it's a standard transmission. It didn't click in my head what he was saying about the transmission. Looking back I can only shake my head, but in my defense I was 17, had always referred to that as a stick shift, and when he said standard, I thought like he was saying it was just an average, accurate standard transmission. I clearly was lost in my thoughts about all the great adventures and freedom I was going to have. So anyways, we pay for the car, I get in it, and realize just exactly what he was talking about when he said it was standard. Ugh. So my dad picks up real quick on the current situation, and says don't worry, I'll teach ya, you will catch on quick. So, I get a quick parking lot lesson and he says, let's see how you do with it on the streets. So we drive around 15 minutes, and I'm feeling confident. We pull up to a red light, and he quickly gives me a kiss on my cheek and jumps out of the car. Tells me to follow the road to hit the highway home. He was going to walk back, and grabbed his car. I was horrified, but he was right. I caught on quick. Because I had to. But it worked. So that's my worst story of being a child who was thrown into a pool to learn to swim, and I'm not complaining. My dad was amazing. Not sure if both these stories fit, but definitely shoddy parenting on behalf of my father. I was maybe 9 years old, and I had an awful flu, or what we thought it was. I couldn't breathe. I had a terrible cough and fever. My dad, a doctor and a highly revered one at that with loads of awards and articles, decides to tell my mom I'm essentially fine. First refuses to listen to my chest at all, then does a 2-second job, and actually tells her to not go seek any other medical help. I don't know, like that would hurt his doctor ego? Tells me I'll get over it in time, and with some sleep. Middle of the night I think I'm dying, and go sleep on the faking floor of their room as I'm scared I'm going to die, which pisses everyone off. So my mom finally hauls me to the emergency room. I'm admitted straight away for a 2-week stay with double pneumonia, tubed up to breathe, and the attending physician was just in absolute awe that my parents, and a doctor at that, didn't bring me in sooner as I could die. That was super lovely. My dad was basically told he had to be a parental chaperone while I was at a sports event. He assumed that, kid's gonna be fine, and even if not, kid will learn what to do in an emergency. If I'm not here, there's a cell phone. Spoiler alert. Kid can't know what to do if kid ends up getting a concussion and blacks out, and no parental figure to be found. My sports coach was absolutely livid and called her ambulance, which I rode in alone until my dad showed up randomly later asking why I wasn't ready to go home. Yeah, yikes, the 90s were rough. I have loads. We had a pet goat. It was like family. One day, in order to toughen us up, our dad turned it into food. I was actually too young to understand at the time. Same story, this time with ducks. I remember the trauma of eating them up, coming home to look for them, and realizing they're the day's lunch. My mother once kicked me out of the house because I wasn't concentrating on the lessons, which she was teaching in the most horrible/horrendous way. I was 4ish. It was cold, so my neighbor took me to their house and gave me tea to warm my body up. Luckily I wasn't molested, hahaha. That had been a kicker. My mother once locked me in the washroom and switched off the lights and told me there were snakes coming. I was 6. This was done a few times. So I had this addict brother. They would leave us with him in order to make us concentrate on the studies more. He would bully me, steal our stuff, mess up what little entertainment tools we had, handheld game devices, etc. Even molested my best friend. I was 7 to 8. They took away my instruments. I used to play guitars, but they thought it was gay. So they did everything to discourage me. I was isolated from everyone. No school, friends, or socialization. Both parents left, and we would be hungry. There was no food and the roof of my room was like it would fall any day. So it was scary, I guess. I became chronically malnourished and depressed. Started stuttering. Developed psychosis. Once I got chest infection, and I had trouble breathing. We didn't had money for the doctor, so I had to sort of give up food to get the medicines, because we could afford one or the other. It was painful, and yeah, I don't trust humans to this day. I know they're just as holes, mean factards. Because of the lack of socialization, I never could make friends or make healthy long-lasting relationships. Most probably I will end up just like them, just a touch more alone. So yeah, I wish things were different. I wish I could have had normal experiences. But that's life. The saddest thing is that they've turned me into someone like them. I have realized that pain and suffering for religious indoctrination just fucks people up. I don't like them one bit. I feel no empathy or remorse for them. In fact, being a pessimist, there are very few people I hate, but they're amongst the few I genuinely hate. That's the saddest part, because as long as that hate is with me, they've been successful. So yeah, it leaves scars, deep-rooted emotional scars. In all probability I will die a very lonely, isolated individual. Some people told me that it's the trend in my family to isolate the victim, children, and condition them to become borderline religious fanatic and dependent on their parents. So, yeah, it sucks. I wish I had met someone who would have given me a safety line or option back then. But alas. My dad was a drug addict / dealer. There was one day that he brought me, 6 at the time, and my siblings, 4 and 2, to someone's house. I think it was the person he would sell stolen metal scrap for drugs, but I can't remember exactly. He left us in the car for hours with the hot air and vents all the way up. I still remember feeling like I was going to choke from the heat, wishing my siblings would stop crying. Even now I still feel sick when I hear music from the band the cassette was playing over and over on repeat. Anyway, my dad gets to the car high as a kite on something, intending to drive home. But he barely makes it out of the driveway before he stops and pukes. Then tells me to unbuckle and come up front. He explains how he's not feeling well and he wants me to drive. I tried telling him I didn't want to, but he was going to make me anyway. He attempted to make me less nervous by telling me to think of it like Mario Kart. Thankfully it's almost a complete straight stretch of main road from where we were to home, but it was terrifying. I couldn't reach the pedals, so most the way there my dad held down the gas while laying completely back in his chair, only occasionally opening the door and leaning over to puke while we flew down the road. I remember weaving through cars and a semi that blared its horn as I took a wide sweeping turn too sharply and ended up in its lane. How we managed to get home without an accident will be one of my life's greatest mysteries, and that's how I learned to drive a car. I might get downvoted to heck, but I sort of did something like this to my daughter. For yo, I'm supremely blessed to have both sets of my daughter's grandparents able to babysit when I'm at work. My husband also works weird hours. My parents have a pool and we have told our daughter that she can never be in the fenced pool area by herself. Period. It's a pretty big area with a big table and chairs and a larger garden, so I can understand her wanting to play there. She's nowhere in danger of slipping into the pool while in the garden. We still set this strong boundary point. When I was young, a boy drowned in a pool where there were plenty of adults around but no one actively watching. Whenever we had kids over, the pool was always watched. When I'm at a hotel pool, I get nervous about watching other people's kids to the point I just leave. I have told this story in an age-appropriate way to my daughter many times. Twice we caught her getting into the area. I put it together that my normally cautious daughter doesn't perceive the danger. I decided to give her a little tough lesson. While in the pool with her on my back, I gently let her down and pushed her away from me so that she had nothing to hold on to. When she cried out for me, after treading water for a moment, I immediately picked her up. The event was less than 30 seconds. I explained the story again to her. She has not gone into the pool since. I feel a little sad that she felt like I let her go, but I would rather she feel a little sad than be dead. I do plan on taking her to proper swimming lessons like my parents did with my siblings and I. Talk about horror stories. Let's talk about flotation devices. Flotation devices are everywhere. They are in so many commercials, ads, and in almost every store. How can they hinder my child's swimming development? I want to start by saying I know you have great intentions. You want to keep your child safe around water. I want you to know you have the right motivation and fully encourage you to be safe in aquatic environments. When we discuss flotation devices, we are not referring to life jackets. Life jackets are required in open bodies of water in most areas of the United States and are highly encouraged for safety in those environments. We are discussing puddle jumpers, water wings, and other devices used most commonly in pool environments. As a parent, those devices give you a sense of security, that your child has extra protection other than you in water. You feel safer knowing they have support, and you could possibly relax more at the pool knowing that. Unfortunately, your child is also gaining a sense of security from those devices. That security teaches them that they are safe, they can swim just like the big kids, and gives them false confidence around water. So, what happens when they slip out of the puddle jumper devices and fight to stay on the surface while you run quickly to the bathroom? What happens when you have your back turned and your child runs to jump in the pool before they are on and fully fastened? What happens when the left water wing slips off and suddenly your child has no balance in the water as they try to retrieve it? In a majority of situations, panic sets in. Panic for you, and panic for your child. You're running to the rescue and your child more often than not becomes sacred of the water as a result. That security you thought you had when an unexpected situation like those listed above happens, goes completely out the window. Sadly, nobody thinks things like this will ever happen to them. They believe that by buying these devices they are being safe, but these situations happen every day. Most drownings are complete accidents and are the second leading cause of child death. Every day, about 10 people die from unintentional drowning. Of these, 2 will be children aged 14 or younger. Drowning is the 5th leading cause of unintentional injury death for people of all ages, and the 2nd leading cause of injury death for children ages 1 to 14 years. In fact, more children 1 to 4 years die from drowning than any other cause of death except birth defects. CDC. So what do the flotation devices have to do with my child's swimming progression? Let's start with body level in the water. When children are in these devices, what position are their legs in? They are pointing straight down toward the bottom of the pool, so these devices put them in the drowning position. Most, in distress, will have their legs pointing downward fighting to keep their head above water until they lose energy and submerge under the surface. If you look at the body position of someone swimming in the correct body position, their legs will be behind them using their feet to kick and power them through the water. That skill alone could save thousands of lives. Another major factor in body position is teaching children how to get air. If a child jumps or falls into a pool face first, they not only need to know how to turn over to get air, but also stay afloat until someone can rescue them. All of these skills seem simple enough, but swimming lessons are a commitment. It takes time to learn these skills, reinforce them, and make sure the child has fully retained the skills. It's so much easier to teach children these skills when they have the opportunity to build their own confidence as opposed to it being given to them with flotation devices and then taken away in swim class. My recommendation is to start your child in swimming classes early on. Work with your instructor to find the best class to fit your child's needs. Learn as much as you can from observing your child's classes, so you can reinforce the skills they are learning in all aquatic environments you take your child to. Point: if you go home from swim lessons and take your child to the pool to only put them right back in flotation devices, you are hindering your child's swimming development. We know your intentions are good and you want to be safe, but do consider that it will take your child much longer to retain swimming skills and could create negative feelings towards swimming lessons for your child. It's a lot like potty training. You don't put your children back in diapers, you continue to reinforce and help them gain that skill. Pretty much everything growing up. Point: I'll start with the worst one. When I was a kid, my dad had me paint the trim of our 2-story house on a tall lean ladder that barely reached the top of the house. You are not supposed to stand on the last few rungs, no sheet, because you'd be above the ladder, and there was a line on the ladder that said don't go above. My dad insisted it's fine while he held the ladder. So I'm at the top of the ladder, nervous, holding a paint can in one hand, painting in the other, and precariously balancing on one of the top rungs. Super dangerous. I'm also leaning to each side to reach to the left/right. My dad decides it's a good time to let go of the ladder and mow the lawn with me like that. I told him I didn't think it was safe. He said it's fine, it's steady. It wasn't. The ladder was shaky. I was past the top rung, leaning both which ways, and both hands were occupied. Thank God I was okay, but was pretty terrified. My little bro also helped my dad on a ladder once to cut some tree limbs. He fell off, Thank God he threw the saw to the side before falling right on my dad and breaking his hip. Dad learned to not play around with ladders after that. Brother was fine / cushioned from the fall. Love my dad, but he's a bit loosey goosey with safety / prep etc. Driving in a stick, my dad literally said, just feel it out. I broke down like 10 times in traffic with people honking at me. Did the same thing for like 2 weeks. Strangely, I had a dream about how it felt and was able to drive pretty damn well the next day. Was struggling mostly with lifting off the clutch at the same time as pushing on the gas pedal. No one ever even explained to me that because my dad insisted I could hear / feel what to do. Skiing. Dad took us up the mountain. No helmet, no snow gear, just jeans. And he was like, just do a pizza to slow down. Accidentally went down a blue / black diamond. Was a kid. Was flying down out of control. My dad was actually terrified that I went down a hard route. Tried to follow me. I was veering off directly toward a shed. Snow / mist flying in my eyes, burning. Bouncing over bumps, gliding. Not fun. And the pizza was not working. I had to purposefully force myself to trip and fall to avoid slamming into a pole / shed. Flew forward, gloves fell off, ski came off one foot, and I face planted. Took me a while to pull my face out of the snow, possibly a concussion. Swimming in rivers, oceans etc. as a kid was normal, almost drowned. Walking on roofs or high up on ladders. I'm good now. And my 3 siblings are too, so all's well that ends well. TLDR below. Sorry. I was a sheethead 15-year-old that knew everything. My mom grounded me, so I ran away. My mom told me to go live with my dad. Neighboring city. Was living with my dad and was ditching school every day. Told my dad I was dropping out. I was a freshman and there was nothing he could do about it. I remember us getting into an altercation in his hotel room. Dad struggled before I had increased his burden to bear, where I ended up in a headlock while punching my dad in the ribs as hard and as many times as I could. I remember him saying, "What are you doing?" I still hear the pained confusion in his voice just by memory. Not the proudest moment in my life for sure. So, I ran away from his house, having now dropped out at 15. Mom moved to New Mexico in the short time I went to dad's, so against my mother's better judgment, she bought me a ticket on a Greyhound bus to where she and her boyfriend were staying in NM. Still being a sheethead, I'm there for 2 weeks. Before I get into it with my mom's boyfriend, surprising I know I ended breaking a window at the hotel they were staying at while walking off in a piss. The hotel then wanted to throw them out, so my mom was understandably pissed and sent me back to my dad's on a Greyhound back to Arizona. What I didn't know was my dad had moved to halfway home where I wasn't allowed to stay whilst I was away with my mom. I was on a Greyhound headed back to Az at 15 with nowhere to stay. I walked 20+ miles from the Greyhound station to a gaming LAN center I used to regular with friends. I lived there for about a month, was kicked out for stealing, and started sleeping at playgrounds. Eventually an old friend of mine heard of my situation and let me stay on his couch. I faked that friendship up. Got kicked out. Found a new friend to let me in. Overstayed that welcome. Got kicked out. Blah blah blah. Did it like 2 other times to 2 other friends. You get the picture. Eventually I met a girl who was unimpressed I wasn't going to high school, but basically told me she would be interested if I wasn't a dropout. I enrolled in school and was with that girl for 4 years. I graduated on time after having to make up sophomore year while doing junior plus SENIOR year. Ended up breaking up with that girl, got napped, met a new girl, bought a home, had 2 babies. Yada yada. I'm 26 now. Life is good. I just wish my parents would stop me from walking out. But then again I know I did everything in my power to break away and did. TLDR. Ran away when I was 15. Was homeless and or couch hopping because I was a stubborn asshole kid who knew it all. Life kicked my dick in the dirt, and sometimes I think about where my life would be if my parents had tightened the leash. Although my stubbornness at 15 was unparalleled, I don't think I would let my 2 sons go out and face the world on their own, no matter the circumstance. Anytime I had something wrong with me, my mother was convinced I was faking or pretending it was much worse. This unfortunately led to so many problems in a child with untreated migraines, hypoglycemia, since birth, severe anxiety, later developing polycystic ovary syndrome at 14, then psoriatic arthritis at 27 along with panic attack-induced arrhythmia. Thankfully she did take my acid reflux semi-seriously, which she only had to because it was obvious from all the puking, dehydration, and diarrhea when they neglected to feed me healthy stuff. I was 30 when I asked her why she had the "let's ignore the fuck out of it and let her figure things out" idea. She said verbatim, "because we couldn't afford a child with problems," as coldly as she could, then walked away. My mother and idiot father told me I was just dramatic or faking whatever. When I was old enough to take myself to the doc and pay, they still had comments, especially when I had sinus infections. Even after literally shoving test results, prescriptions, and doctor's notes in their faces, I was met with scrutiny. They always told me to suck it up, go to work or school anyway, figure out how to get over it. Despite me being 16, curled up on the floor screaming, sweating profusely, febrile, bleeding very heavily during that time of the month, and actually passing out from the period pain, I was told, "It's just a period. Every woman has them. Stop it." Despite me losing 3 days worth of info and not even remembering what day it is, my way home, or simple words from a migraine, nothing. We have an extensive family history of migraines, heart problems, and anxiety. When it came to the arthritis, she took it a little seriously, thinking it was mono at first. They did not take the news well. When I was in my 20s, that I decided against children, because it was very painful and downright dangerous for me to be off certain meds and hormone implants. They won't even listen to my doctor boyfriend who agrees having children is super dangerous with all I have going on. I had shitty non-attentive parents growing up, so there are many stories, but the one I never let go is when I broke my foot playing soccer in a neighbor's backyard. I was probably 9 or 10 and called my mom crying because my foot hurts to walk on it and asked her to pick me up. She thought I was being lazy and didn't want to walk home, so she told me to get home now. The neighbor mom was like, "What the fuck?" and drove me home. I came in limping, and my mom told me to stop faking. I went to bed and woke up with a swollen foot, couldn't put my shoe on, etc. My mom gave me her shoes, which were a bigger and wider size. I didn't go to school that day after she left for work. I literally couldn't deal with the pain, so I said screw it, skipped school. I started to bear the pain more and was getting around limping and using broomstick handles as a goddamn crutch. The weekend came around and my mom had the audacity to try and get me to play in my soccer game. My coach wouldn't even play me, so I sat on the sidelines. Suddenly the ball came out of bounds, and so did the soccer players, and they landed right where I injured my foot. I screamed so loud and cried in so much pain. It got a lot of attention, and so my mom was forced to take me to the doctors. We discovered that I cracked the outside of my foot and there was a chip of bone floating around on the edge. This was 3 years after they adopted me and realized they didn't like me as much as they thought. You confronted me with an interesting question, because after review, I can't think of anything that happened that wasn't at least attempted to be explained. Probably because my sister is severely disabled from a little before birth. Then I added on some of her seizure meds because the small pink tablets tasted sweet, putting me in a brief coma. Then a few years later, my older brother drowned by getting trapped in the bottom mud of a lake. Our father had to resuscitate him, which we were then promptly taught how to do. Another few years, and my brother was stung by bees, and his heart stopped for 10 seconds on the way to the hospital. We really hammered in that allergen stuff. After that point, me and all of my siblings have had brushes with death, and came out of it because someone around us was smart and knew they needed to do something. It was very rare for me to experience completely thoughtless behavior, probably because we each almost died at some time every couple years, so everyone knew we were trouble, including us. Nobody took it for granted that we would always take everything we were taught and run a mile with it. Point at it. Actually, there was one thing, but it wasn't parenting. My father died in my care because his body was broken and his pain was so great, I didn't know how to help him. He was an addict who had a reason to keep using, and I was 15 and the last person to step up and try to help him. 6 years after his left femur was broken in 6 places and his hip shattered. Between the disreputable doctor, the irresponsible hospital, the business that didn't adequately salt their sidewalk, and social security leaving a 37-year-old man in a walker to fight for his disability for 6 years, he was barely holding on by a thread when I stepped in. I was in so far over my head, I straight shut down after a couple days, and in that state, let happen a few things that would paint a little red on my hands. However, a lifetime of being taught to take responsibility and learn from my mistakes helped me though this. It even cured me of intentional self-harm, as I couldn't strike myself to absolve my guilt, not in my father's name. Instead, I was forced to take in every detail and figure out the patterns that led to a death. This has led to a trauma-related hardwired reaction to people in need, namely, I'll accidentally destroy myself to help the people around me. It's only in the last couple years that I've been able to value myself as a person too. But this isn't a parenting issue, so much as it's an issue relating to our American society and its willingness to make a sick and dying father give everything he had, and more, to secure survivor's benefits for his disabled daughter. Forcing a 15-year-old, emotionally challenged boy to do what was obviously a grown professional's job. My story is actually the opposite point. When I was a little kid, 6 to 8, I went to a pool a distant relative was teaching on. She was young, probably not even 20 at the time. Anyway, she taught kids how to swim, and they knew more or less how to, unlike me. The pool was also incredibly deep, way more than 2 meters, but it was drained a bit, I guess for safety, but it was still way taller than me for sure. As I was saying, I got in, they started making a train kicking their way through the entire pool. At one point in time I got detached and panicked. When I grabbed another kid in despair he kicked me, on purpose or not, I'll never know, in the chest hike, and I started struggling around on my first class never having been in a swimming class. My relative and instructor was chatting with someone, and the sides of the pool were too far away, drained, remember? Now, I don't remember why I did not screamed, or maybe I did, probably not. In retrospective seems simple enough, but I was probably swallowing water. She did notice me at one point, but she waved and continued talking. I had to think quickly and decided the best was to sink to the bottom and make my way up through jumping. And I did. Slowly. I don't remember what happened exactly after that. I was probably crying. I do remember people arguing, and my relative crying. Of course I never went back there. Forward a few years, I was scared AF of water. I mean, I tried, but I couldn't get my head under water, just my face at most, which is odd, because I like to submerge my face. It was impossible to me to do it without instantly going back up like it or not. Anyway, years later, when I was between 11 and 12 we had moved cities and we lived near a river. One time I was with my family in the river on the afternoon, and one of my uncles saw me trying, and decided to push me down. Haha. He is not a physical guy, not the tough love kind of person, just a shy serious, more or less, dude, so I have no idea why he did it. He wouldn't nowadays for sure, and I would probably get pretty angry at him if he did with my little brother, but he did, and I slowly got used to submerge my whole head underwater that day. Now I'm 25, and I still don't know how to properly swim. I should learn though, but TBF there's many things I should and did not do, but I do like water. Or rather, I always did, but that time I lost the trauma I had. I suppose point is not what you are, stop. Quite the opposite, and for sure it doesn't always work. I'm against tough love for the most part, but I don't know, I thought it could be a fitting anecdote. Sorry for bad English. I have always been afraid of needles. As in I was 16 when I got my first shot without crying, screaming and needing to be physically restrained. When I got blood work as a kid I said that they were killing me and they couldn't finish. Well, I kind of spoilt it already, but yeah, my parents and multiple doctors had to force me down in order to get a shot. Worst part was them always complaining about it and then making really terrible comparisons as to why I was a horrible person for being scared of needles. They didn't do it out of insensitivity, just me being a little bitch and not letting them give me a shot, so honestly, can't give them too much flack. Also, if you're afraid of needles but need to get the COVID vaccine, please read this. I'm going to describe to you, in detail, exactly what it was like to get the shot as someone who is still terrified of needles, and still makes a bit of a fuss. They are not lying to you about how little that shot hurts. It is most comparable to when you get poked with something, and you're like, okay yeah that hurt a little but I'm fine. It is such a small sharp needle that it almost didn't even hurt. I'd almost just say it was just unpleasant. Now on to how to go about getting it without freaking out. When you get to the vaccine site place, do not look at the doctor or the needle. If you look at the doctor while they are pripping the needle or getting ready to stick it in, you will get super duper nervous and either tense up or shy away. Try not to tense your arm up much. Keep it as loose as possible, as that makes it hurt even less. Do not shy away from the doctor. You are wasting their time, and that could end up killing someone. They need to inject the vaccine into you quickly after it's taken out of the cooler, otherwise it will spoil. Now I'll describe exactly what getting the shot felt like. So first of the penetration. You know how everybody always says the shot only feels like a pinch, but it actually hurts a little bit more than that? Well guess what? This one actually does feel very similar to a pinch, just more compact. The initial pain, more like unpleasantness, is not very bad, and for me, it wasn't even the worst part. Don't get scared by this part, it's not as bad as it reads, and I think this was just a unique thing to me. The worst part was actually what I think was the plunger hitting the bottom of the syringe, which felt like someone tossed a skittle at my arm. Now I will tell you now, the needle will be in your arm for 3 to 4 seconds, but I have great news. It doesn't really feel like anything after the initial penetration. That pain goes away in like a second, and then you don't realize the needle's in your arm. Seriously. I didn't realize they had taken the needle out and put the band-aid on. Now to the immediate, day 1, side effects of the first dose. The first dose. A few minutes after you get the shot, your arm might start to feel a bit numb / heavy / tingly. This is normal according to them, but if you feel concerned, ask one of the doctors that might be walking around. There is a very rare chance that you might get a anaphylactic reaction to the shot. I think a 0.0011052631578947368% chance, so just in case they'll likely have you sit around for 15 minutes or so to make sure you're okay. After around 1 to 3 hours I felt most of the slight soreness in my arm disappeared. 2 side effects. I wake up in the morning and youch, my arm's pretty tender. It feels a little uncomfortable, have it hanging by my side or not raised too high, and isn't really problem. However, when you raise your arm a bit higher, the pain and soreness definitely become more noticeable. Still not super bad, but still there's no way my arm is going to be lifted much over its limit. Depending on your pain tolerance you might be able to, but I didn't. Now you might be thinking, oh maybe I'll just take some painkillers to kill the pain. Well here's the thing, we sorta, don't know if you should be doing that. If you take prescribed painkillers for stuff before you get the shot, please talk to your doctor about whether you should continue. They don't recommend you take painkillers before the shot, and they say you probably / maybe shouldn't after you get it, because it might decrease the vaccine's effectiveness. They do say, if you are going to take any painkillers after the shot, don't do it right after. That Tylenol might not have as big as an effect, but if you can avoid taking any painkillers after, unless you're medically required to, and talk to your doctor, and you really shouldn't take any before. Pro tip, moving your arm around will help so much. The increase in blood flow reduces inflammation, pain, and soreness, and helped me get some of my range of motion back. The pain you feel on the second day is annoying, but not debilitating. Day 3, most of the pain was gone. Not really much to say here. And no, I'm not a government sheep. The vaccine didn't give me autism, there were no dead babies or microchips in it. Also, for fact's sake, if the government really wanted to track you, it would probably much easier to just, track you using the location services on your phone. Luckily you can turn those off, and worst comes to worst, get a pin phone. You can buy one here which has physical shut-off switches for GPS and sheet. I'm not trying to push an agenda or anything, just help my fellow trypanophobia out. Yes, that means people who are afraid of needles. Also, there aren't even microchips big enough to fit through the needle. Google microchip needle vs regular needle. Stay safe. When I was about 7 at a Boy Scouts award ceremony, my mom was really bothering me and I was very annoyed. I told her to leave me alone and she straight up smacked me in the face in front of all the parents and kids, got her stuff, and left point. So I was there all alone. I had no idea why she left. During the entire ceremony all the parents kept asking me where my parents were and told them they left. I remember getting an award and the scout leader asking me as well, and the sad look she got on her face when I told her I was the only kid on stage without a parent. Point now, in my parents' mind, they were teaching me a lesson that my bad behavior would warrant them abandoning me. But being fucking 7 years old, of course I couldn't figure that out. Point, you know what my parents taught me? Nothing. They instead taught everybody else there that they don't care enough about their son to be there at their award ceremony. In an effort to appear tough to me, they instead showed every person there how pathetic and lousy they were. Point to everyone else, I wasn't the son with the tough badass parents. I was the son with the parents who didn't love their kid. The cherry on top was my dad picking me up, and I asked him why mom left, only for him to flip out even more. You mean you don't know what the fuck? Literally. Wasn't told why until the next day. Point now, it might be one thing if I was an adult, but being 7 years old, yeah, have a responsibility to faking teach your child things. Then again, perhaps I'm thankful they didn't teach me anything. Okay, so when I was a little kid like 2 or something, I had walked into the pool and almost drowned. Point. Since then I had been afraid to swim, but I had been getting along steadily, but I was afraid to go into the deep end. Point. By the time I was about 7, our lessons finally had us going into the deep end. I had only been taking swimming lessons for a year, a few months, and I was too scared to really do it. I've always had a pushy crazy father, but this was probably peak crazy. I was too afraid to jump off the diving board because I couldn't swim well and was afraid of drowning, and he gets up, yells super loud about how I'm being a super baby in front of the entire town pool community, and says something along the lines of if you wanna live you'll swim, if not you'll die, and throws me into the deep end. Well, I figured out how to swim out of that part of the pool. Not nice, and I still kept a morbid fear of drowning and still sucked at swimming until I was 10 to 12, when I learned how to do it on my own in the shallow end of a pool by just going slowly at my own pace and not rushing anything. Point. Moral of the story: sometimes your kids need to get there on their own and take their time to get comfortable enough to do it themselves. I did swim that day, but I didn't get over my fear until I managed to do it on my own for my own reasons, without crazy throwing me to my death. Had a similar incident with him and bike riding. Never got around to doing that properly myself yet. Side note: does anyone have any ideas why he's always been like that? He did it with a lot of things, like if I wasn't ready he'd just like rage his way through, and it never fixed the problem, just made it worse. Sorry y'all, this is a long one. Point. I used to teach skiing at a pretty large mountain, one with miles and miles of trails and a good range of difficulty. I taught a season-long class, which meant I had the same kids every Saturday and Sunday for a few months in a row. At the time, these kids were 3 and 4 years old, obviously beginners. Because of their age we kept the classes small, but even with 5 kids there was a sizable split in ability level. For the STID, skiing is one of those sports that feels incredibly unnatural until a certain point. That point is different for everybody, but 100% of new skiers have the same challenges with their balance, coordination, etc. In case you didn't already know, toddlers are neither patient nor well balanced. When we teach at this age, we take things slow. Fun is the most important aspect for learning, and regular bathroom breaks. Anyway, I had my class teetering on the edge of the Poma area. Some could handle the longer run, some could not. So we warmed up on the gentler, shorter magic carpet. One mother watching us was so outraged that her little princess wasn't skiing the Poma. She came over and berated my teaching style, saying I was holding her daughter back. She clearly wasn't having fun, and that she wanted to speak with my manager. Lol. Sure, let me step into the back room here. After some very embarrassing telling off, she informed me that she would withdraw her daughter from the program unless I took her baby to the Poma. Now, I told her she was free to do so, and we may join them in a little bit. She took her daughter from class, rode up the Poma with her, and then skied down by herself. Her daughter sat at the top of the hill crying and wailing, while the mother tried to cut in line and go save her princess. When they were reunited and the daughter was calmed down, Mama coaxed her down the hill. The daughter had her eyes locked on us the whole time. After lunch, the daughter was brought back to my class by her dad, way cooler person, and we had a splendid afternoon. TLDR, if you pay for a ski lesson, stay in the ski lesson. Unless you know how to teach, don't. I was about 3 or 4 when my stepdad taught me to swim by throwing me off the side of our speedboat. It was in a busy harbor, off of a pier, where the ferry boat terminal was. He was a captain of commercial fishing vessel and my mum worked on an island not too far from the harbor area, so we would drive her to work each day. One particular evening, when we had dropped my mum off and were making our way back through the boat traffic back to our wharf. It was sunset and kind of cold, but thankfully it was summer. You could see the seals zooming around under the boat, surrounded in black water. I had Coke bottle thick glasses and couldn't see without them, but didn't wear them on the boat, so I couldn't lose them, which meant I couldn't see at all. The boat stopped, he threw down the anchor and turned off the boat and my stepbrother, 4 years older than me, hopped into the water and complained about how frigid the water was. The next thing I know is I was trying to stay afloat and breathing in water through my nose. It was terrifying. My stepdad had thrown me overboard with a life jacket to follow and said if I wanted to live I had to get to the life jacket. I could feel bursts of cold water whipping by my legs when all of a sudden I felt really soft fur then a nibble on my leg. A faking seal bit me. I learned to swim so fast that I think I might have actually learned to fly in that moment. Needless to say my mum was pissed, albeit the method worked, and I now have a very intense fear of water I can't see the bottom of. A week or so later I was on one of his work fishing trips that were about a week or so long, on water where no land is in sight for miles and miles. Ours boat ride at least, when I had been mouthing off to my stepdad, and because I wasn't listening, he threw me overboard. In the middle of the Atlantic Sea, where they were fishing with huge frag nets. I've never been so scared in all of my life. This may have been the first time this happened but it certainly wasn't the last. He's still a vessel captain these days and he's in his 80s. I later found out that this friggin' man had served 30 years in prison for murder before my mother was even born. He's 30 years older, and I didn't find this out until I was in my 20s. He was a great dad though. I was 7 living in a small town in Wisconsin of about 800 people. My parents homeschooled me until 3rd grade because they wanted to shelter me. Eventually their hours got changed and they weren't able to make sure we got our work done, so they relied on my 11-year-old sister to babysit us. My brother was 5 and had severe ADHD, and she had so much trouble with him that she wasn't able to help me with my work. So eventually my parents realized that homeschool won't work and signed us up for public school. We weren't properly socialized at all and essentially were thrown with the wolves. Sure enough my brother and I got fucking mauled by students who didn't understand that we weren't taught the basic functions of school, how to make friends, and what you should avoid doing/saying to not seem like a weirdo. My parents didn't think far enough ahead and because of that, we were frequently bullied and made a lot of mistakes that resulted in me being sent back to 2nd grade in the first 2 weeks. My poor brother got eaten alive on a daily basis because his ADHD was so bad that he honestly should have been put with the special ed class. I'm now 20 and turned out fine. However my brother is 18 and sadly has few in-person friends of his own because he is too scared and insecure to make friends because of what happened to him during his childhood. Oftentimes he hangs out with me and my friends, and as much as I didn't want to we recently had to temporarily ban him from hanging because he struggles to control what he says in public, such as offensive jokes or talking about being high in my best friend's workplace. Not me, but my childhood dog. We had a golden retriever when I was a kid, a breed known for being great swimmers, but when he was little he never wanted to get in the water. So of course we let him get comfortable with the concept until he felt like it was safe to join us. Right? Nope. Dad just tosses the little pup in the pool with no warning. Our dog did swim out of the pool, but afterwards the poor guy was totally traumatized and never went into water again, unless it was super shallow and a ball had fallen in. Poor guy. For me, probably learning that children can be complete psychopaths sometimes. I was young, like 12 to 13, and a friend of my parents offered me a babysitting job to watch her 3 kids for a few hours. I agreed, but as soon as their mom left, these kids totally did a 180 on the sweetness and just turned into little demanding demons. The eldest brother was the worst though, from kicking you in the shin to cussing you out for fun. The real treat was when he said he was going to the bathroom, only for him to start yelling bloody murder for help. I run up the stairs and open the door thinking he was hurt or something, but no, I walk in, and the kid is halfway out of the 2nd story bathroom window with this mischievous little smirk. Apparently he was yelling for me because he wanted to show me how cool he was for being able to climb onto his roof, and that he did it all the time. Needless to say, I leaped forward and had to pry the kid back inside before he could climb onto his 11-12 pitched roof. That really freaked me out, and as soon as their mom got home I noped out of there. This was the only kid I've ever met who I'm genuinely unsure if they grew up to be a good person. Edit. I probably shouldn't say that last part. I'm sure he grew up okay. Well, kinda sure. Let me preface this first. My father is the best one I could ever ask for. He sacrificed everything to keep my brother and I stable in our childhood, especially after the divorce. I have lived with a fear of uncontrolled heights since I was little. Cliff faces, ladders, roofs, carnival rides etc. I can fly in airplanes extremely well, aspiring pilot, so it's always a control thing. One weekend in the summer we were on a family reunion and my uncle booked a hot air balloon ride for like 6 of us. When asked if I wanted to go, I politely declined, stating it would be more scary than I would be able to conquer. After a couple more invitations from my family, my dad said, "Oh no, he is going. He'll be fine." I immediately had a huge surge of terror. I told him as we were approaching the balloon that this would be a terrible experience for me and I would watch from the ground when they went up. Eventually, he grabbed my hand and told me I have to try it. The moment the basket lifted off the ground, my panic attack started and only got worse as the altitude increased. I was sitting on my feet covering my head and crying from the fear. I know plenty of people do this, and it is far more safe than driving a car, for example, but nothing anybody said or did help me. At above 5,000 feet I was shut down. Blacked out fear response. My dad never again pressured my fears and apologized for thinking it would help me break that fear. That was the most old school dad move I've ever seen him do, and we joke about it to this day. I hurt my ankle when I was around 10 or 11 and my dad refused to drive me to school. Said that when he hurt his legs, he had to walk a much longer distance to school in much worse weather, and that I had to learn to toughen up. Every step was excruciating. I was about half an hour late to school that day and had to beg the teacher to let me stay in at break and lunch because it hurt so much to walk. When I was 15, I ended up falling down a flight of stairs and hurting my ankle again. My mother wanted to take me to the hospital, but my dad applied the same logic then as he did when I was 10. It took my mother 3 days to convince him, and even then, he only permitted for me to see a GP. By that point, my ankle was swollen, full of blue/purple bruises, and could take no pressure at all. I can remember the GP sternly asking my mother why she hadn't taken me to a hospital, and she got very sheepish and said something like my husband wouldn't let me. I was referred to the hospital since I needed an x-ray, and it turned out to be fractured. But not only was it revealed to be fractured from this fall, but also that it had been broken several times previously. The technician described the bones as looking chipped away at. He speculated that I might need surgery in the future since it's so damaged. I wonder how much of that could have been reversed if my dad wasn't such a piece of shit and my mother wasn't such a faking doormat. TLDR. Hurt my ankle. Dad made me walk to school. Years later, it transpires that my ankle was probably broken at that time. This isn't a story, more like what I'm currently learning in my undergrad. There's a limit to how much you should push your kids to eat. This includes food types and amount. Kids are also insanely sensitive to smells and flavors, since they haven't been completely numb to it yet. This can make eating some types of foods very uncomfortable. So if your kids aren't eating a vegetable or something, have them try one bite before they can fully reject it. Of course I understand that kids can be picky eaters and you fear them having unhealthy habits as an adult. This is most often the case with households that only have unhealthy foods. If you're worried about them having an unhealthy diet in the future, they probably won't, just because you are already in a demographic that is aware of diet. Unhealthy habits are usually due to lack of education and awareness, so you're probably good. The bigger issue is with portion sizes and being forced to finish your plate. If you're forcing a child to finish a portion that they did not serve themselves, you're inhibiting their chance to learn to recognize their level of hunger and portion control. This results in overconsumption, unable to recognize hunger and fullness signals, etc. Thus obesity. And if you surpass the lean and healthy demographic even once, your body is changed forever in terms of hormones, their release, recognition, etc. It's so much more difficult to maintain weight regain following weight loss than it is to maintain a healthy BMI from the start. So only make them finish their plate. If you let them choose how much food they want. Point for reference, most healthy people will stay within 1% of their annual caloric intake/expenditure. Those who aren't usually start their journey towards unhealthy lifestyles and weights. So if you are consistently gaining weight over a couple years, you are on the path to obesity. Point source, studying pathophysiology of obesity in my undergrad. Can provide papers and texts if needed. I was 12 and my stepfather gave me the keys to the boat. Point he was drunk at the time, naturally 12 years sober now, so not to paint an ill picture of him. I was 12, we were camping in Maine. It was him and my two uncles, also drunks. We had a 19-foot boarder. Nice little boat. We were on a very large, but relatively shallow lake. They told me to go the boat out and have some fun. The rest of them would hang back and basically get drunk. My stepfather started it up, showed me how to throttle faster, slower, reverse, and of course steering. Apparently that was all I needed to know in 1995. Anyway, I was buzzing around happy as a pig in sheet for over an hour. I went to the larger part of the lake to see what I could see. I remember being told to stay between the two boys. Problem was, there was only one boy. Looking over the right side of the boat I saw these massive yellow stones inches below the surface as I approached at a moderate speed. It was a whole wall of them, under the water. I had no time to react, and even if I did, I wouldn't know how to raise the trim or anything. I just braced for impact. The hull took a little bang first, then the prop hit the rock, stalling the engine. I was stranded in the middle of the lake for 2 hours before someone came by to lend me a hand. Whilst in tow, I see my stepfather and one of my uncles canoeing towards me. They apparently went searching for me. They capsized the canoe while loading it to find me, and the trolling motor sank to the bottom of the lake, so they were under drunken manual power in their pursuit. My stepfather gets on the boat, puts it in neutral, and fires it up. Yep, never got that lesson in my 30-second boating course. The prop shaft was bent at this point, so it wasn't a smooth ride, but it got us back to camp. Anyway, the resulting sunburn and dehydration from 2 hours stranded in direct sunlight made for a terrible weekend. But I did survive. When I was a child I wanted a pet dog. My dad buckled me in the back seat, safety first, and drove me out about 4 hours from home. He opened the door of the van, undid the belt buckle, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me out. He threw a large hunting knife at my feet, its large pointed edge digging into the earth before me. He dropped my Power Rangers backpack on the ground next to the knife. He pointed north and told me to head in that direction, and that he'd be there to pick me up along the riverbank the next day. He told me there were wolves in these woods, and if I wanted a dog so badly I should prove I can take care of myself before taking care of another animal. He turned and left me there with tears in my eyes and a fire in my heart. I looked into the bag, and within it was a box of matches, antiseptic, a roll of gauze and bandages, a single roll of toilet paper, a flashlight, some extra batteries, a compass, a small bag of beef jerky, teriyaki flavored, and a bottle of water. I set off north as my father had said, immediately tripping over some roots where I fell and scraped my knee. I cried for 10 to 14 minutes while I used the majority of the gauze and bandages. I drank some of the water and was off again. About an hour of trying to follow the compass. I had no idea if I was using correctly. I was hungry and ate some of the beef jerky. It was good. I walked until the sun was beginning to set and decided it was probably a good time to start a fire. The temperature outside was dipping. I gathered sticks, twigs and leaves to attempt to start the fire, but everything was kind of damp and I couldn't get a proper fire started. I ended up using a bunch of the toilet paper to get a small fire going. I ate more of the beef jerky and drank more of the water. Far more than I should have. After crying myself to sleep and a cold night of violent shivers, I woke up to the sun peeking through the trees. My back was in pain, my jaw sore from chattering so hard I was unsure if I'd be able to make it the rest of the way. My knee hurt from where I scraped it, so walking, along with the back pain, was difficult and labored. After about half a day's hike, I finally came upon the river my dad had told me about. I could see him sitting on a camping chair with an empty chair beside him next to a roaring fire. At his feet was a box. I hobbled over to him, where I stood over him not saying a word. I then sat down in the chair and we sat in silence. In the box I could hear scratching. My father then reached over to the box, opened the flaps, where a kitten popped its head out. He finally broke the silence. "You've proven yourself to me that you can both take care of yourself and another living creature. Here's a kitten just like you wanted." Literal story response to the question point was over at a relative's house with my cousins and another uncle messing around in the pool. There is a large floating flat circle platform, and soon this becomes a "king of the hill" game with everyone involved. The pool is long and slopes down on the bottom to a 12 deep end, but the shallow end is around the 3-4 range. My 6 or 7-year-old self could stand in the shallow end just fine. But as I get on the floating platform, it starts drifting toward the deep end, and to this point I've never been in deep water and don't know how to swim or even tread water. Proceed to me white knuckling the edge of the floaty with all my strength, and 2 older cousins trying to push me off, and a full grown adult uncle trying to pick me up and throw me off, which he eventually does. I immediately go under and flail wildly, popping above the water for a second, gasping for air, then back down, bobbing over 5 or so minutes, as no one knew I couldn't swim. And it could have easily been just 45 seconds, but felt like a very long time. Eventually the same uncle who threw me in jumps in and drags me out of the pool, saying, "I didn't know you couldn't swim." I stayed out of the pool the rest of the day, but from then on almost inherently knew how to tread water. Weird how humans can learn that almost subconsciously. TLDR was thrown into pool, didn't know how to swim. Not so much parenting, but my first welding job out of school. I was getting paid a lot for the type of welding, MIG-J, in my area, and I was also the greenest welder there. The ad said 2 years experience or more, but they liked my resume, and we had a good phone call, so they interviewed me and said they'd give me a shot. My first day was safety stuff. Sign here. This is a blueprint of what you're doing. Make 500 of these. See you later. Fac. I see a finished piece from the shift before me and assume that's what I'm doing, and it matches the print. So I start looking for parts and I get them together, figure out the jig, look at the print and finished part and start zapping. Did I mention it's over 40 deg.C and only getting hotter? Ever seen the PPE required? A couple minutes later, a cool guy, not a supervisor, but up there, comes by to chat. Bring Gatorade. We had people bringing us Gatorade at least once every half hour. If we ran out, we were to go get some from the freezer. Hydration was no joke. Check on me. We are talking and I'm welding between sentences and chugging Gatorade. Guess what drink I faking hate now? And he says I'm doing good. I don't quite hit quota, but my super is cool with it. Every day they throw in an extra challenge for me to figure out. I'll learn so much. I was a welder with less than 8 months experience, all of that school. I was qualified through the Canadian Welding Bureau, which was required. It was a kinda important shop for what they made. You'd think that sucks. I think they are paying me good money to teach me. I work through the disgustingly hot summer, finish my contract, have a solid reference, have paid off school, testing, PPE, bought myself a ton of stuff, Put some money away. They treated me like I was an experienced welder and I respected them. I did ask for help before faking up, though. They liked that. Better than the foundation of a building's reinforcement failing. Not my parents. It was my brother who is 10 years older than me. When I was around 7 and learning to swim, all I could do was dog paddle. My mom asked my brother to teach me to swim. My brother hated that, so his answer was to throw me in the middle of our pool and push me back to the middle with a pole. If I dog paddle to a side, jump forward a little over a decade, and I'm wanting to learn to drive before I turn 18. My mom had 2 rules when it came to getting a license: none of her kids under 18, and you had to take your driving test in car with a manual transmission. My brother had a little beater Honda with a 5 SPD, so my mom asked my brother to teach me to drive a manual. 3 blocks away from my mom's house, still in the neighborhood. I'd had enough of my brother flipping his sheet when I'd stole the car, so I got out and said I'd walk home. My brother followed me the entire way, flipping out at me through the car window while I walked. I got home, went straight to my room, and listened to my brother go off to my mom about how ungrateful I was and how I'd wasted his time. It was less than a half hour of his day, lol. Needless to say, I was a pretty good swimmer as a kid, and I'm glad I was forced to learn to drive a manual. I honestly believe learning to drive a manual makes you more focused of a driver, as you're having to pay attention to the car itself as well as the road. It's more to pay attention to, but it also helps keep you focused on actually driving and not being distracted by random things. When I was young, we used to move around a lot. It was middle of the academic year. I think I was in th 4th grade. So my father took me to the only overly competitive school he came across. We went through the process of admission and the teacher asks, when will I be joining, since they're having a mid-year examination. He said right now. I don't remember the faces or the expressions of the teachers, but they refused, and I was having a bit of a panic. Because education isn't that standardized at that level in my country, no teacher in their right mind would agree. Forget about the notes, I didn't have books. I was literally in another town yesterday, but my father was adamant. So I was seated in one of the halls, and I do remember the pity that other students as well as teachers had for me. I didn't have a pencil with me, since we used pens at my last school, but I didn't knew I would be flung into a test right away. So my dad gives me one. He was carrying one that day. The exam had already been going for quite a while, so I just sat while I was hurriedly presented with a paper and an answer sheet. I could see that the teachers were polite because I was screwed before I even donned the school uniform. Then they call up one of the monitor, a girl, who tells me it is actually English literature that is the topic. Apparently nobody cared for the sinking ship that was future. So I immediately take out the pen and she says, "Oh, we write with pencils. You can't use a pen." It was perhaps one of my earliest memories that made me the rebel I am. If I was teacher and some idiot pressured his child like this, I would have sent them back. My dad was a huge fan of that kind of parenting style, and oh boy, I got stories. He is a great guy. He just kinda gave up on traditional parenting on his 5th child, literally throwing me in a pool to swim as a toddler. Worked out surprisingly well. I love swimming now. Instead of arguing with a 6-year-old on why jackets are mandatory to wear during winter, he let me dress myself, and I got a massive cold. Wore my jacket without complaining after that. He didn't teach me to drive. He put me in a car on the road and told me to not fuck it up. It worked horribly. I failed my driver's test 3 times and had a mental breakdown every time I entered a car 4 months after that. 1 year later, and I'm driving ambulances around as a job. So it worked. Did I crash my car though? Yes. Yes I did. Against a wall. He sent me off to live in a completely different country alone at age 15 for a few months to mature me. I didn't know anyone, not even the host family, who was the worst. Those fakers didn't even give me food, and nobody cared for me. Had no idea about budgeting expenses, how to buy groceries, or how to do anything. I somehow survived and it was great. I can cook some bomb frugal meals now, and I developed a cheap bus ticket radar. He used to be a hippie and it shows, but he's the best dad ever, and I only got minor trauma as a kid, so it's cool. Generally a great childhood. 9/10 would never do it again. Not my parents, but another kid's parents. So growing up I lived in a cul-de-sac with a bunch of other kids that were the same age or slightly older / younger than me, so we would be outside playing stuff like baseball, basketball, and other stuff pretty much every day. There was one kid who would kind of go from being my friend then being a dick. We were playing basketball one day when we were like in 5th grade. And it was me, my best friend, and this dick. The dick suggested that it should be a 1v2 vs me, which was unfair, because I was the worst at basketball and the only one who couldn't dunk on that hoop. It was a short hoop, but I just couldn't jump high enough. But I agreed and we played. I said after like 15 minutes that I don't want to play, and he would say come on man, and my friend would say, don't worry about it, you got it man, and this kept happening. And it didn't help the whole time this kid was playing like a dick. Instead of playing normally, he made it dunks only, which I couldn't dunk, and he knew that, and he would purposely run through me instead of around me to piss me off. So eventually I got pissed off enough, and walked off, while yelling that he was a bitch. This is where it gets interesting. This was the first time any of the kids there had swore. Remember we were like 11 at the time, so not at swearing age yet. He then ran up to me, and his dad was watching us. Instead of telling us to break it up, or anything like that, he was yelling punch him in the face, and he did. And fact that hurt. And to me that kind of matches the description of this post. Later the mom came to complain to my mom that I called her son a beach, but this was after I told my mom what happened. I didn't include the beach part though. My mom then said that doesn't give your child the right to punch my son in the face, and the mom said something along the lines of that didn't happen, your son is lying. My mom just shut the door on her and lectured me a little bit, but she knew I was telling the truth about being punched, because especially then I was a baby and couldn't take a punch. I still kind of feel bad for him though. He was a dick, but it was from obvious daddy issues. I don't know if he was abused physically, but definitely verbally, and that was kind of public. I remember we would see him outside practicing baseball. His dad would chuck it at him, and if he missed it, he would then be getting yelled at by his dad like stop missing the ball, stop being a chicken, you have to get in front of the ball, why can't you just catch the damn ball? And you can tell that when he dropped out of all sports in high school, that his dad wasn't pleased with it either. Ignore the fact that your non-stop talkative as heck daughter went mute for an entire year before grade school. Ignore whatever the doctors told you. Ignore whatever event brought it on. Ignore possible diagnoses of autism. Don't change a single thing about her seeing her drug addicted biological mother, even when she obviously is uncomfortable doing so. Let her obviously struggle in school her whole life. Ignore the cuts you got a glance of on her arm. Ignore her breakdowns from the social aspects of school. Ignore the telltale autistic behaviors and try to stamp those out of her. Joke about her not talking for a year and apparently learning sign language for basic communication. When she is now 25 and happily married to her best friend of nearly a decade who has witnessed all of these behaviors, continue to joke about the silent year. Insist that there was no traumatic event that it stemmed from. Insist and change the subject when prodded for information on what the doctor said. Say you don't remember where you took her to for sign language lessons or testing. Stick to your guns on either joking about it or pretending it didn't happen. Brush off and never discuss the memories of abuse that she's slowly uncovering after 8 years of therapy. Don't show interest in her recent diagnosis and treatment of ADHD, severe anxiety, PTSD, from an abusive relationship, and something vague that she knows in her heart happened as a child, and autism. Follow this parenting style if you desire to have a fully grown offspring that will never trust you and won't want to be close with you. You might get the joy of their presence once or twice a year for a handful of hours on holidays, but that's all point. If this struck any chords, you can choose your family. Blood isn't everything. Just because you're related, you do not owe your relations a single thing if it isn't deserved. When I was 12, I fell off my bike. Well, flew off my bike is more accurate. Came down and landed directly on my right elbow and slid about 10 feet across the pavement. My arm stung a bit from what I assumed was a scrape, but I couldn't tell because it was covered in gravel and sand. I tried to get up, then I realized I couldn't move it at all. So I went inside to tell my dad I think I broke my arm. Without even looking away from the computer screen he says haha, sucks to be you, and then looked at me and told me to go wash the dirt off of it, so I wasn't tracking dirt around the house. So I went to the bathroom and painstakingly stuck my arm under the running water to see what was going on under the dirt. That's when I realized most of the skin was missing from my elbow. When I slid across the pavement I essentially grinded through the skin and cartilage, right down to the bone. I went back to my dad and told him, "Dad, I really think there's something wrong with my arm." He snapped at me, shouted, "Stop being a big baby, quit bugging me, and go back outside." My mom came home a few hours later and found me pacing on the driveway and clutching my arm because I was in so much pain. Once I showed her my arm, she took me to the hospital immediately. Turns out not only was my bone partially out of place and sticking out, I had even managed to crack the joint in my elbow in half. The break was so severe they couldn't do anything about it at the hospital in my small town, and ended up having to go to a hospital in a larger city. Several surgeries, pins, and almost a year of physio, and I still wasn't able to regain full range of motion in my right arm. Haha, sucks to be me. My story is about not seeking medical treatment. I was 15 years old and my friend's dad took my friend and I to a beach at North Lake Tahoe. My friend had dark skin and was very tan. I'm Irish and have very pale skin that freckles. My friend's dad hung out on the beach and sunbathed. My friend and I hung out mostly in the water for 8 hours or so. I noticed that I was shivering in the water, but I really didn't feel cold. My friend and I piled into the car and her dad smoked with the windows up. I felt very nauseated. After I got home I realized that I didn't feel well. I could just make it to the toilet before passing out from overwhelming dizziness and nausea. My mom said that I looked pretty red. I wake up the next morning to my mom reminding me that I have an orthodontist appointment and to hurry up and get ready. I stand up and felt so faint that I fell back against my bed. My body was badly sunburned. I told my mom that I couldn't go to my appointment. We argued a bit about it, but I prevailed after telling her that I couldn't stand up without vomiting or fainting. My mom went to work. After 3 days of feeling sick like this and staying in bed, my skin blistered and peeled. My part in my hair, the tops of my feet, between my toes, etc. all peeled. I figured out later in life that I had heat exhaustion. Heat exhaustion should be taken seriously and medical attention sought. My parents were children of the Depression and grew up not seeing doctors unless it was a dire emergency. I was getting bad grades in elementary school, so my parents decided to homeschool me because they thought they could do a better job. The only problem is that they both had jobs, so I just sat at a table and did a workbook all alone until my older siblings came home. They were always too tired to play with me, and they had homework. I never saw my friends that year either. My family was religious, so when I was quietly crying myself to sleep I would desperately pray to God that he would give me a dream in which I could go to school, or have a dream where someone would play with me. Most nights I wouldn't even have a dream, instead just waking up with dread in my eyes. But one night I dreamt I was at school. I was so happy. I rushed through the hallway and opened a classroom door so I could find some other kids to play with me. But in the seats were just monkeys laughing at me. I wanted to play catch, but they played monkey in the middle with me, and I never got to throw the ball. I was 10 years old when I stopped believing in the church. If God was real, he was mocking me. That winter I didn't ask for anything for Christmas because I had no one to talk to about it. I didn't know what any of the cool toys were that year, or what other kids had asked for, so I didn't ask if anything. I only vaguely remember what I got that year. The next year, when I finally got back I was hyped, but the very first day I discovered that my friends had replaced me with another kid and they didn't want to play with me anymore. I had to bribe my older brother with my future Christmas toys to play with me during recess, because if I didn't I'd be alone. That coming Christmas my brother got a lot of my presents, but he wanted more, so he complained to my parents, and I was deeply embarrassed and got in trouble. I wouldn't say I had any friends in middle school, just people I'd talk to. Nobody ever hung out at my house or played video games with me anymore. And I was routinely bullied as well. When high school came I had absolutely no friends. At least the bullying stopped, which was fine I guess. My grades suffered. I routinely failed classes. If high school wasn't designed to graduate anyone who showed up, I'm sure I wouldn't have made it. Eventually my parents divorced, and I went to college, and that's where I'm now. Throughout most of my high school life I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, why I was a loner, and had no friends, why I was depressed, why I was like that. Because at the time I literally had no memory of the entire year I was homeschooled. I distinctly remember someone asking me if I had ever been homeschooled, and I said no. It was only in college, when I learned about people repressing trauma, that I decided to go through my life year by year over an hour, and finally we remembered that entire year, when I was left alone in the house all day and nobody would play with me. I still have guilt about being this damaged over a mere year of neglect, but it honestly stacked on each year after that. My parents are nice people and I feel guilty for blaming them too. They were just too busy. I'm still damaged and can't say I'm doing better, but at least I know what caused it. Ugh, not parenting but swim lessons. I was about 4 or 5. Granny told me my parents had signed me up for swim classes. Wasn't really bothered, just forgot about it till we were outside the pool lol. So I went in on my own, and there was this woman with short hair who was the instructor. Hair part was relevant, because I'd never seen woman with short hair. There were maybe 7 other kids. We stood on this big block thing that's half in the water and half out, and the lady tells me to take off the goggles. Then she made 7 other kids pick up buckets of water and pour it into my face. They must have done this with every new kid, because they hardly needed to be told. It was horrible. The chlorine was in my eyes, my mouth, my nose. One kid tried to push me under, and she didn't do anything to help me. After a few minutes, I tried to pull myself out, but the walls were really high, and I was struggling. She grabbed me by the feet and pulled. I hated every second of it. After a few lessons, my granny told my parents she would not babysit me anymore if they made me go. Thanks granny. Side note, I got my revenge on the other kids by being able to float on my back and relax while they went underwater. I didn't swim for a while after that. Thankfully, a family friend ran swim lessons, so I went there instead. I'm quite good now, and I love swimming. The family friend actually called it swim club instead of lessons, and it was only a few years ago I found out it's not a club. Oh well, anyway, that was just a rant from me lol. You probs skipped it and that's fine. I don't mind. This was just to get it off my chest. When I turned 18, and I mean the exact day I turned 18, my mom slapped a credit card into my hands under my name and told me absolutely nothing. I have a very hard time paying attention and learning things, as my brain is basically mush. Didn't help that I have autism as well. At the time I knew a fair bit of financial common sense, but not financial knowledge. So with money in my hands, I decided to buy my own groceries from the supermarket we had almost in our backyard. They were expensive compared to other stores, but at the time I didn't really care. That and microtransactions from games on my phone racked me up enough that I was about $3,000 in debt by the time I moved out. My mom never bothered to teach me finances in a way so that I would actually retain the information. She thought that I had the potential to be Einstein level smart and all that jazz, when in reality, I wasn't. I don't think of myself as super smart because I'm not. Of course, this was the woman who thought she was holier than thou when it came to finances, so, ick now, no big surprise. As of now I'm still $3,000 in debt, still paying it off to this day. My mom now wants me to buy stocks and invest like she does, and I keep telling her I don't know how, only for her to reprimand me instead of teaching me. This is why you should have listened when I tried to teach you. Sigh. I grew up on a cattle ranch, where my dad would also train some of his buddies' horses on point. When I was 10 my dad told me to train a horse on my own, while he was branding cattle. Keep in mind that this horse was a fresh horse, never been ridden before. I saddled the horse up and got on point. I fell a couple of times before I decided to ask my dad for help. My dad said I needed to learn how to do this because it'll help me with life. I tried and tried and tried, but still couldn't break the horse point. My dad had this wonderful idea of putting a few of our dogs in the round pen to calm down the horse point. This action did the opposite actually, and the horse went ballistic. I mean, I can't blame him either. Having 4 dogs come biting at your ankles would scare me shitless. My mom came out and saved me from this endless torture, and I ended up having 2 broken ribs. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days and my dad visited me every day. But when I got discharged he said, "Now that you're all better, I have another horse for you to break." What? Luckily, this second time, my dad showed me how to break a horse properly, learning from his previous mistake. Obviously, my dad didn't mean to hurt me or anything. He's just used to putting his kids in these situations. Since I'm the only girl out of 3 kids, my brothers started ranching and breaking horses at 9. I started at more like 11, and my brothers were stronger and didn't mind getting tossed around. When I was 8, I was literally thrown into the pool from the high diving board by a swim instructor. It was my first summer in swim lessons, and I was really timid about it. At the end of the summer we were all supposed to go to the high diving board on the deep end and jump in. I told my instructor I wasn't ready. She said, "Get over it. You have to do it." So I get up there, knowing I can't swim, and afraid of heights. I'm just standing there at the end of the board, bawling my eyes out with a line of kids behind me. My older sister was at the bottom, begging them to let me come down, but they wouldn't. One of the instructors for the older kids came up the ladder and literally shoved me off the diving board with no warning. All I remember is going under the water and not knowing what direction was up or what I was supposed to do. I can clearly remember just being surrounded by water and seeing bubbles all around me, completely sure that I was not going to make it out of there. Somebody jumped in and pulled me out. I'm not sure who, might have been my sister, but I don't remember. I got out of the pool and started walking back to the locker room still crying. My instructor looked at me and said, "If you weren't ready you should have told me." I have a vague memory of my sister telling her off as we walked away. I went home and never went back. I never did learn how to swim. I'm 40 now and still can't stand being in water higher than my waist. Come to think of it, maybe this is why I have a problem respecting authority figures too. Dunno if anyone's still reading these, but here goes. Midway through grade 11, I was 16. My mom decided we were gonna move to a new city. So we did. New school wouldn't let me enroll, so I had to wait until the next year and started grade 11 again at 17. Apparently my mom thought I was lazy and annoying because we moved from a decent house down to a 2-bedroom apartment and suddenly I was nearby all the time. In the house my bedroom was shoved into the basement with the washing machine so that I would be out of the way with nothing to do because no school and in a new city I knew nothing about. So sick of me, she dropped me off at my uncle's while I tried to redo grade 11. He's only 7 years older than me, so he's still just trying to sort out his own life. Naturally, I didn't finish school. I was alone. My uncle was either working or out with friends, and I went into a deep depression and just stayed in my room. After some time my uncle said he needed to find a new apartment, so I mentioned it to my mom. She told me to figure it out. I was almost 18 after all. Her words. I didn't know what to do. So end of the month rolls around as on my 18th birthday, I'm officially homeless. She let me sleep in her van for a couple nights while I sorted my shit out. I basically spent my days at a public library trying to figure out what to do, and somehow I came across a youth homeless shelter. Spent the next nearly a year living there while I found a job, saved up, and learned to live on my own. I'm nearly 29, have graduated college, and have started a career. In that point she made me believe this was all my fault. I thought for years that this is what growing up was. I haven't forgiven her. I rarely speak to her. I'm mostly doing better now. My dad, brother and I were doing some geology work way out in the middle of nowhere, northern BC. We had to get across this creek maybe 10 feet across and 2 feet deep in our Suzuki Sidekick. This would allow us to drive 3 kilometers and park close to where we were working. Anyways, dad says, "Yeah, just jiver. Don't go slow." So I jiver and launch off the bank into the creek and come to an immediate dead stop. Water was rushing up and through the cab, soaking my feet and disabling the engine. Luckily we were able to tow it out with our old 2500 Dodge Ram. Now for the fun part. All we had was a 20 feet tow rope, and being over 100 kilometers on logging roads to the nearest town, we didn't want to pay for a proper tow truck. So dad had the genius idea of having myself and my brother sit in the Suzuki and steer/brake while he towed us back to town. The gravel logging roads we were on were still partly active and were in pretty good condition. Lots of little potholes but nothing too deep. Anyways, after we got the Suzuki onto the road and towing back to town, dad starts picking up speed. Him being in a big truck with big tires, he couldn't feel the road as much as we could. He didn't have his radio on, and there's no cell service out there. I was white knuckling trying to follow his back tires with no power brakes, no power steering. I was honking and swearing and screaming for him to slow down, but he was listening to music loud and thought we were just having fun. Picture going tubing on a lake pulled by a speedboat, except on gravel roads. This one corner comes up, we are drifting around it trying not to die, and the tow rope, huked up front and center, almost went under the driver's side front wheel. If we didn't get out of that turn, when we did we would have rolled into trees and died, and then dragged another 20 feet. Won't forget that rush point TLDR. Got stuck out in the bush and genius dad decided it was a good idea to go gravel road tubing. When I was 11, my much older, 24, sister took my younger brother and me sledding. It was a super cool and long hill we'd never been to before. Point at the bottom of this epic hill was a tree-lined walking trail that extended the mostly harmless hill into a very dangerous black diamond-esque beast. Some of the older cool kids were continuing down this portion, so, naturally, it seemed like I should too. I was on one of these, which gave me all the false confidence that I could steer my way clear of the trees on either side of said trail. No point in a feeble attempt to ditch before impact. I went back first into a nice, thick tree trunk. As I laid there iving, one of the nice cool kids ran up the hill to my C's. When she finally made her way down to me, she was far less sympathetic than I was expecting. C's, you just knocked the wind out of yourself. Walk up this long ass hill and we'll go to Chuck E. Cheese's and play games and have pizza. So I did, and we got in the car to go get shitty pizza. Only I knew something was wrong and insisted on going to the hospital. She finally relented and took me to a clinic where they took a urine sample in which I pissed blood. 2 ambulance rides later, I'm at Children's Hospital getting prepped for surgery to remove a pulverized kidney and repair a torn spleen. The surgeon said that I would have internally bled to death in a couple more hours. Glad we didn't get that shitty pizza. Point to this day my poor C's gets emotional when the story gets brought up. I know it wasn't apparent, but still thought it belonged here. Fortunately for me, this was never my own parents' approach. However, my wife's parents were maybe the worst example of this that I know. While in college, when my wife and I were first dating, she invited me to go skiing with her folks over winter break. Now, I had never actually been skiing, and I made this abundantly clear to all, but they told me not to worry, that they'd be happy to teach me. And with that, I hit the slopes for the first time. For the first half of that day I rode the chairlifts with my wife and her mom, followed them down whichever run they picked, and did my best to soldier through. Now, I was fairly athletic back then, playing soccer, baseball, and working out several times a week, so I felt a physical challenge like skiing was manageable. It was miserable. I was eating shit left, right and center. I was wiping out and losing poles and skis. I was a hazard to myself and damn near every other person on that godforsaken mountain. Meanwhile my wife was cheering me on with gems like, bend your knees, lean downhill, and try turning. Her mother, the instigator and person selecting the runs, she had the only map of the mountain, took more or a see at the bottom, approach. It was the last run before lunch, and I got off the chairlift at the top of the hill, and saw that the top half of the run covered in 2-foot mounds. Now, I'm not an idiot, I've seen the Olympics, and know what faking moguls are. When I asked if this was a joke, my mother-in-law to be said that it wasn't as hard as it looked, and that I shouldn't let myself be intimidated. And so I got bullied into one of the most humbling and frustrating experiences of my life. Fast forward to me chasing a runaway ski down the mountain, a sprained knee, shirt full of snow and a badly battered ego. At lunch I finally got my hands on the map to see what we'd been doing all day, and to my surprise we had spent the whole day on intermediate and challenging slopes. Suffice to say I was faking livid. My wife and I spent the remainder of that trip skiing without her folks. Mostly on green slopes, and I fared much better. I will not allow my in-laws attempt to teach my kids how to do anything. This is only a few days old, so pretty raw. I'm the parent in this one, and while I didn't mean to intentionally throw my kid in the deep end, that is exactly what I did. We just had a snorkeling, skin diving holiday. My youngest outgrew their old kit since our last trip, so we bought them a new bigger flipper slash snorkel slash mask set for this trip. First day we chose a calm and quiet beach to let everyone ease into snorkeling again. The kids flat out refused to test their gear or even swim in the shallow calm waters. We know how to swim, fine. We head out into the choppy area with the nice reef to dive on. Me, C, child, C, my snorkel keeps filling up with water. Let me have a look and I'll see if I can fix it. C, no, I'm fine. Fine, let's go swim 20 meters from shore. Child is struggling, and on we head back, in tears, having a panic attack. Wife and other child are 20 meters further out, so just the two of us. Fine. We head back in. Child is in tears. It's too hard. I don't like this. I don't want to swim. I'm super angry because we are 1200 kilometers from home. We tried to ease into swimming in a safe area and kids refused. Other child is missing a piece of one of their flippers and we didn't find out because they refused to test earlier. I'm angry because kids are stupid and refuse to test slash check slash prepare. Next day we go to another site and swim 100 meters offshore onto a shallow reef. Kid again complains it's all too hard and wants to head in, so I take them in. Next dive I take kid snorkel, so they stop complaining. Snorkel is extremely faulty. Takes in water on nearly every breath. Ejecting water has 50 chance of the one-way valve staying open and just flooding with water. I take many mouthfuls, nearly lungfuls of water using this snorkel. Worst dive ever, nearly drowned myself. TLDR, made my kid dive with a faulty snorkel. They nearly drowned twice, and I was angry at them for it. TL2R version. Scroll down to last line. When I was 5 years old, my godfather and his husband took me to Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. I fell in the pond. This was early 80s. I was tossing popcorn to the ducks in the rookery, while my godfather and so were in a heated discussion. The slate rock I was standing on shifted. Next thing I remember is holding onto a rock underwater thinking I'm going to drown. This is how I die. Luckily some Boy Scouts across the pond saw me fallen and quickly made their way to my side. They pulled me out of the water and proceeded to journal in our experience. To this day I wonder if I'm one of these guys' old childhood hero stories. Well, flashed past my godfather renting a room by the zoo in attempt to clean up the evidence of them not watching me. After dozens of baths the water finally stopped turning green. Don't tell mom, however, all it took was my mom hugging me when I got home asking why I smelled like a fish. To bring out the day's main event. Now none of this was my fault, right? No? So why they try to kill me? Forward about a week later they decided I needed to learn how to swim so this would never happen again. Class is right. Nope. They threw me in the deep end of an in-ground pool at my godfather's apartment, yelling sink or swim. They were laughing. I was drowning, and they were laughing. What the actual someone jumped in and got me. I don't recall who. I was choking on water and I remember that I felt sick and tired the rest of the day slash night. To this day I'm absolutely terrified of deep water, especially murky water, even shallow water if it's murky. My so was a lifeguard in his youth. Logically I know he could save me, but I just can't shake it. They loved me too and almost killed not once but twice. We are planning our yearly camping trip. It's depressing being on shore while everyone else is kayaking or out on a canoe fishing. Although last year I fished off the dock, which for me was a big step. My family is talking about renting a pontoon this year to spend the day on tubing. Let me tell ya, the anxiety is so real. In conclusion to my novel, please don't drown your kids and call it teaching. Back when I was around 11 I had fallen off a park platform that was around 8 or 9 feet up. I knew there was something wrong with my arm when I couldn't move my fingers. My mom told me to walk it off and refused to listen to anything I said. When I began crying after the initial shock had worn off, she said if I kept crying she would give me a reason to cry. Like a broken wrist isn't one. When we went home cause of me quote unquote being a baby, my mom refused to bring me to a hospital and told me to go to bed. By the morning my arm had swelled up to around 3 times its regular size. So my mom dug out one of her old arm braces for when you sprain or hyperextend your wrist and said I could wear that even though it didn't nearly fit. She had used it around 6. Fast forward a month or so and my mom finally brought me to a hospital when I still couldn't move my arm. Turned out I had almost completely shattered my wrist and they finally got me a cast, and even then she was objected to. She still claimed that the brace would have worked fine. I still to this day can't move my left wrist in a circle completely without feeling immediate pain because of the way it grew back. Though I don't entirely blame her cause that's how her parents raised her. At one point she had fallen into an open sewage pipe thing and her left leg's bone had shattered and was sticking out of her leg, and she was forced to walk all the way home without help. It's still not an excuse for bad parenting though. She also did many things similar to this, but on a lesser scale, telling me to toughen up buttercup or rub some dirt on it etc. I backquote him a little late to the party, but 2 things come to mind. Point. When I was 6, unfortunate events ended with my pinky toe below a wooden lounger. My friend was lying on top. It hurt so badly. I was on the verge of tears for the rest of the day, partly because my parents just kept saying I know, the pinky always hurts the most. Fast forward to the next morning, when I woke up to my pinky toe completely blue. Turns out I had an infraction, incomplete fracture, which apparently hurts even more than a normal fracture. Point. When I was around 12, I was into soccer and played the keeper. During a match against a pretty aggressive team, someone shot me straight in the face from around 6 feet away. For 3 seconds I could only see white, and I woke up on the floor, my nose bleeding like crazy. Someone gave me an ice pack and that was it. I'm 25 now and having a septoplasty next week. Apparently my septum was broken and it caused me to develop sleep apnea because, and I'm quoting my doctor here, it looks like a C. I never knew about my sleep apnea until recently. I just knew that most mornings I'd wake up completely soaked in sweat and not feeling rested. I've done some research and my broken nose may be responsible for the following: sleep apnea, frequent strep throat, my vocal cords, larynx, and tonsils had been infected so often, I don't respond to antibiotics anymore. Depression, always kinda had them, but they got worse around my early teens, and even memory problems, since my brain has been working with too little oxygen for so long. I know it's not as bad as other stories here, but this really faked up my life. In retrospect, I still try to ignore symptoms because I think it's not enough to go to the doctor for. I live in Germany, so I don't even have to pay for the appointment. All this is just the tip of the iceberg of how my parents screwed with my life, sometimes without even realizing it. My cousin was that one bright and clever kid who is then lost in live. He was living a pretty privileged life as his parents were, and still are, very rich. He was given what he wanted in terms of facility. For his high school, his mom sent him to live with our grandparents in another city. His mom wants him to learn how to live without his parents. I was living with my grandparents too at that time, and I could clearly see that he didn't know shit about living by himself. He couldn't wash clothes, wash dishes, cook, tidy up his room. He couldn't even make his own study schedule. Our grandparents were already old and couldn't take care of him. No one was able to guide him what to do in life. In consequence, after he graduated from high school, he still couldn't take care of himself and was still lost. He wasn't sure what to do next for his life. Knowing that, his mom sent him to go abroad for college, hoping that he would find his way and learn how to take care of himself there. So he went abroad. 2 years later, he still hadn't gone to any college and his foreign language was not progressing. He was stuck. He was struggling. He wanted to go home, but his mom said no. He should stay there and learn how to live alone, she said. 3 years later, now, he is still living abroad, not going to any college, and playing games all the time. He only contacts his family for money. Everyone is worried about him, including his mom. Every time he asks for money, his mom always gives him. Now his mom and his family wants him to go home, but he is really upset, particularly at his mom. He still wants to go home, but I think he is reluctant because he is really angry. Sorry for my English. Always had a pretty bad relationship with my mum, so I have many stories. First one, she was obsessed with diets, and she was tired of dieting alone, and also tired of seeing me not growing up as the thinnest girl in my school. So during the month between middle school and high school she decided it would be a good idea not to let me eat to teach me how to lose weight. Didn't end up well at all, and took me 6 months to start healing while going to school. Fun fact was that she got called by high school on my first day because I fainted from stress. Mayo. Another bad one during middle school. I did hurt my ankle at school, but she didn't want us to pay attention to it because that's how it will heal by itself. Problem was it did hurt a lot, and I had to walk home every day. One morning before going to school I got the marvelous idea to jump few times on my ankle for the sprain to be worse. Indeed I couldn't stand up anymore, and my mum was going crazy. I choose the morning to stress her out because she can't be late at work, so she finally agreed not to send me to school. Later I found out with the doctor that I had 2 sprains on the same ankle, like on 2 different ligaments. I didn't even know it was possible. Oh my god, I'm definitely better now since I don't live with her anymore, but what she teaches me about health did cause a little trauma. I remember ending up drunk in a car accident during my college days, one leg broken, but my mind kept denying it. Like, I couldn't walk properly, and my skin was getting blue at one part a few days later. But it's only 1 week later when I got an internal hemorrhaging that I reacted and went to the hospital. When we make it to New York on our little life raft, we were followed by none other than this Jason Voorhees, now all grown up. He was supernatural. He appeared everywhere. He killed everyone one by one until it was just me and my boyfriend. We managed to fight back in the New York City sewers. The toxic waste that runs through the sewer tunnels at midnight managed to vanquish him.